Just before we get the evening started, there's a lot of empty chairs up at the front. If anybody at the back would like to move forward, you're welcome to. Might be able to hear a little bit more easily, but come on up if you like. And we'll just wait a couple of minutes because I have to wait till 5 o'clock. Just before I do call the public hearing to order, just for those of you who may not have been to a public hearing, I'll go through the agenda so you're familiar with what to expect. There will be an administrative briefing just to provide context for the application and background for the application. The applicant has an opportunity to make a presentation on the substance and context or content of the application, and this is the applicant's only opportunity to speak unless they're asked a question. There'll be an opportunity for council to ask questions of clarification to administration or the applicant. And then we'll move into the public submission period. That's verbal, so I'll invite people to come to the mic up here and speak to the application, and I'd ask that you provide your name when you step up. Everybody has 5 minutes. I understand that there's some people who have something on a stick, photos or a map or something on a stick. So the municipal clerk will help install that, and the timer won't start until you actually start speaking. I would encourage people, as always, are respectful, and let's allow everybody to share their perspective and their opinion in the proper spirit of a public hearing. After the meeting is adjourned, the municipal clerk will publish a record of public submissions that include all written submissions received regarding this matter, regardless of whether the author is present or not this evening. And then just before the adjournment, there's an opportunity for administration to provide any final closing comments on the verbal and written submissions. And after that, I'll adjourn the public hearing. So with that, I will call the public hearing to order, and I'll ask that the administration take the mic and provide their piece.
Thanks, Your Worship. Good evening, everybody, and members of councils and the community. Just have a short presentation just to introduce the bylaw that we're hearing tonight. So it's a proposed amendment to our land use bylaw. The bylaw is 22-2010. And the amending bylaw is 2018-14. So the proposal in front of us is for the redesignation of Area B Plan 941-2236. This single titled parcel is broken up into 3 separate kind of areas or sites. And these are the sites. It's up in the Peaks of Grassy neighborhood. So the application is to redesignate these 3 parcels of land from urban reserve to direct control district, public use district, residential single-family detached plus district. The definition of urban reserve, so the purpose of what the land is now, is to protect land from potentially suited for urban uses from premature subdivision and development. It means that lands in this district have technically only received preliminary screening. In this case, we have had pretty much every screening document done for both land use and subdivision have been already provided to determine the potential suitability for any development. These reports were provided in the first council package when the bylaw received at first reading on January 8th, if anyone would like to go back and review those reports. So this amendment application, which I'm sure the applicant will speak to later, is but to allow for the development of 27 dwelling units and up to a maximum of 13 accessory dwelling units. And this piece of land is 1.3 acres in size, or 0.74 hectares. This is the proposed land use map for the direct control district. As you can see, there are 3 sites, and on each site there's a different type of built form proposed. All residential. And the built environment would be on the sites that are marked with the orange. The green is proposed for the public use district, which at subdivision would become municipal reserve land. So it would be dedicated or designated municipal reserve through subdivision. And that concludes my presentation, if there's any questions.
Thanks very much. Are there any questions from members of council at this time? Seeing none, thank you very much. And then I'll invite the applicant to take the mic and give their presentation.
Mayor Borman and councillors, good afternoon. My name is Pierre Doyon. I'm here to speak about Peaks Landing, a proposed infill residential development in the Peaks of Grassy. With me tonight are my 2 partners, Dan Madlong and Lawrence Hill, who, along with Julie Budgeon here from Corvidae Environmental Consulting, will assist me in answering any questions that you may have about our proposal. Now, in less than 10 minutes, I will provide you with a brief overview or a land rezoning application, less than 10 minutes. The full submission is on the town's website, along with answers to frequently asked questions. As you can see from the slide here, the 4-acre site is divided in 3 parcels. In the orange color again is where the 27 residential units would be located, and the green indicates that 54% of our land would be dedicated to green space or public district. I will speak tonight about 3 main themes. The first one being why Peaks Landing is appropriate for development. Second, how Peaks Landing is aligned with the municipal development plan. And thirdly, why Peaks Landing is a timely development for Canmore. Peaks Landing is the most studied infill development project ever done in Canmore. It really is. Here's a list of studies and reports that have been filed with our submission. Geotechnical, undermining, utilities and road, sustainability screening report, which indicates a score of 65, wildfire report, steep creek flood mitigation, also an EIS, or the environmental impact statement, that's been reviewed by a third-party reviewer. The information in these studies and the proposed mitigation measures that will be implemented will result in a better and safer community. Fire-smart fuel reduction will help protect against wildfires. Our site has been identified as low hazard zone from possible steep creek flooding, and the planned mitigation measures will make the community safer. Human-wildlife conflict issues will be reduced by eliminating food sources such as the buffalo berries, but also with other proactive mitigation measures. Peace Landing is aligned with the municipal development plan on many fronts. It's an infill development using existing services and infrastructure. Affordable housing. The number of perpetual affordable homes alone represent 26% of all residential units planned for the site. And the integration of perpetual and market affordable housing makes Peaks Landing the most affordable project ever built in Canmore by private landowners. Now here's a bird's eye view of our neighborhood and what we're proposing. So all three partners live in the neighborhood. So Lawrence lives, want to show it, Lawrence? Right in that dot. Dan lives just straight across the street, and I live just further down. That's where we live, right on that street. So the site number 3 is for 5 single-family lots. Site number 2, the middle parcel, is for 8 duplex homes with mandatory mortgage helper rental suites. And site number 1 integrates 7 perpetual and 7 market affordable townhomes. Now, if you look on the street, you'll see that all utilities are in place and just need to be connected to the homes. You can also see the green space in the tree buffered zones behind all the homes. Let's have a look now at the proposed build forms. Site 2 is for duplex homes with mortgage helper suites. Now, these duplexes are smaller than what could have been built on this site. This is the first example of market affordable housing. Site 1 is for 7 perpetual and 7 market affordable townhomes. Now, perpetual and market townhomes are 2 stories plus walkouts. The PAH units have tandem parking pads with storage. And an agreement has been signed with CCHC to acquire the 7 PAH units. Now, here's an artist's rendering of the townhomes. The perpetual affordable housing are 1,230 square feet with 3 bedrooms. And the design of those PAH is based on extensive input from CCHC and from the community at large. A lot of consultation with the community. The market townhomes have single-car garage and are just over 1,200 square feet above grade with an overall of about 1,650. The market affordable townhomes are 400 square feet less than the average above-grade townhomes built in Canmore since year 2000. Peaks Landing, in summary. Peaks Landing is an appropriate development, appropriate infill residential development. Peaks Landing is aligned with the MDP on so many fronts. Peaks Landing is very timely in terms of affordability and also in the variety of build forms. And the demand and the need for the homes we're proposing has never been higher in Canmore. Now, on Wednesday of last week, we hosted an open house for those interested in our PAH offering. We were overwhelmed with the response and the interest in our project. 75 attendees. People ask us, how can we support your project, our project? 58 people signed a letter of support for our project. I'll give a copy of this letter to the clerk in a moment. And I'll also give a copy of the agreement between CCHC and Peaks Landing as well. Thank you for your time. We'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members of council at this time? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
So at this time we will take submissions from the public.
Re-announce the seating. Yeah.
Once again, I encourage people that are at the back to come forward if you like. There's a row of empty seats up here, so room, unless you're more comfortable leaning against the wall. So in this segment of the public hearing, I will alternate inviting people up to the mic. I'll alternate between those that wish to speak in support of the application, those that want to speak in opposition to the application, and those that may want to speak in a neutral manner. And I'll remind you that there's a 5-minute time limit on your speaking. And again, encourage everybody in the room to be respectful to each other. So with that, I will open the mic for anybody who would like to speak in support of the application. At the back. Just give your name for the municipal clerk.
My name's Steve Ashton.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So my name's Steve Ashton. I was raised in Canmore, resident since 1993. My wife was also raised in Canmore, and we're now raising our young family in Canmore. I'm a business owner in Canmore and volunteer in our community. I'm also the chairman of the board of directors for the Canmore Community Housing Corporation. CCHC is an arm's length, not-for-profit corporation made up of board of directors of local resident volunteers, including myself. Our goal is to increase the supply of affordable housing in Canmore, which we have done through rental and home ownership programs recently, such as Hawks Bend, MacArthur Place, and Mineside Court, to name a few. We currently have sold out our developments and have an additional 118 people on our wait list. The CCHC Board of Directors supports this bylaw amendment and development and have voted in favor of acquiring 7 units to sell to our waitlisted clients. CCHC believes the development will have a positive impact on the community that needs this type of housing and believe that we'll have no problem selling this product to our waitlisted clients. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll ask anybody who'd like to speak in opposition. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Rafael Atgas, and I oppose the rezoning of the subject lands. I don't live in the Peaks of Grassy, but have been a resident of Canmore for a few years. I am a business owner, and I am a volunteer in Canmore. I will address the third-party review and the environmental impact statement by reading the analysis completed by Mark Taylor, who grew up in Bow Valley and has been a resident of Canmore for 14 years. All quotes here are from the Associated Third-Party Review, or TPR. The TPR is generally supportive of the process followed by Corvidae in completing the environmental impact statement. But reading past the check in the box affirmations that ensure the general process was adhered to, we see both reports identify serious concerns with the EIS, In summary, there are two very clear and compelling messages in the EIS and supported in the TPR. These messages paint a picture of a high-risk, totally irreversible project that, excluding the minimal and tenuous PAH commitment, has a negative overall SSR benefit and poses significant exposure to long-term wildlife problems. These key messages are: number one, the proposed development area is an important sensitive wildlife area. The forested area is naturally entwined with the adjacent Quarry Lake Local Habitat Patch and the Three Sisters Along Valley Corridor. In the greater Canmore context, this area may be relatively small. It is critically connected to the Greater Bow Valley Wildlife Movement corridors. Destruction of this habitat presents a material risk to the overall wildlife movement and viability of the Bow in the Bow Valley. Quote, Quarry Lake Park has been identified as a high conflict area for black bears and humans. Current research and management initiatives indicate human-wildlife interactions are an important consideration in the proposed project, end quote. Number two, there are significant uncertainties in both the magnitude of the impacts and in the potential success of the proposed mitigation actions. Quote, negative effects are predicted to occur during both the construction and built-out phases of the project. Associated also agrees that there is an uncertainty in the potential impacts of the project and the mitigation measures proposed, end quote. As this development is wholly irreversible, if worse than expected impact occurs, we will all suffer. The TPR specifically highlights uncertainties in the proposed mitigations. The predicted pre-mitigation effects were highlighted by Corvide as negative, long-term, and irreversible for black bear, grizzly, cougar, and elk, so the risks are high. At the same time, some mitigations have been clearly identified as ineffective. Quote, Associated notes that there are uncertainties with respect of the long-term success of some of the mitigation measures proposed. Neither the two railing fence or hard edge associated with the construction of the new homes provide a contiguous or restrictive barrier that will exclude humans from adjacent habitat patches and wildlife corridors or prevent wildlife entering to the peaks. These features are permeable barriers that are unlikely to be effective, end quote. With such risk exposure, reliance on questionable mitigation measures is dangerous and irresponsible. Associated also raises the question of who is ultimately accountable for implementing and paying for these ongoing efforts. Will the applicant continue to subsidize these necessary actions, or is this burden to be shifted to the Canmore taxpayer? Finally, the Associated identifies several shortfalls in the EIS, ranging from not assessing the proposed flood control berm area through not including the stress that increased population in peaks will have on the area. In closing, the Peaks Landing EIS and TPR each identify considerable risk and uncertainty in both the project impacts and the proposed mitigation associated with this project. Given its irreversible nature, it would be irresponsible to allow this project to proceed, and in doing so, accepting significant risk of very undesirable outcomes. Quote, an increased inhuman use may result in more wildlife interactions, resulting in negative conflicts, where people could be injured and or killed, and wildlife relocated and or destroyed. End quote. I sincerely request Council to deny this rezoning and to remain protectors of Canmore wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask people not to clap or cheer or boo. I mean, I understand that some of the other speakers will be echoing your sentiment, but it's not really appropriate in a public hearing to be applauding. So at this time, I will ask if there's anybody that'd like to speak in a neutral position. Again, anyone in a neutral position? You can change your mind later and take the mic if you like, but then I'll ask if there's anybody that'd like to speak in support of the application. Anybody out there that wants to speak in support of the application? Come forward then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. For those who don't know me, my name is Scott McGee. I've been a resident of Canmore and homeowner in the Peaks of Grassy since 2003, and I continue to be all my life, or hope to be. While we are domiciled in a sensitive ecological environment, unlike the town of Banff, our town is not a national park. I don't believe we, the wildlife, or the habitat we share will be seriously jeopardized to justify obstructing this infill development or this private property. I do not concur that as proposed development of Peaks Landing will significantly have a deleterious impact on the adjacent properties, the Peaks of Grassy neighborhood, Quarry Lake, or our town. I don't believe it's there goes the neighborhood type of proposition. This and similar development will have only a negligible impact, and in fact will be beneficial primarily for the new homeowners and residents of the Peaks, and therefore all our town. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll look once again to see if there's anybody that wants to come and speak in a neutral position. In which case, I'll ask anybody who'd like to speak in opposition to come forward.
Hi, my name is Cynthia, and I don't live in Peaks. I live in Three Sisters with my husband, and I am a business owner. As Canmore full-time residents and taxpayers, we would like to express our concerns about the proposed development in Peaks of Grassy. Canmore is a unique place, not because of its mountains, but also because the wildlife who still lives here. Otherwise, Switzerland would be as nice as Canmore, but it's not. People come here to Canmore to see elk, coyotes, small mammals, and hopefully a bear or two from a distance. We are here because we believe that this is the Canmore we all love, and because we care. Human-wildlife coexistence is so important that last June, a report made by administration and technical experts was released, recommending items to improve coexistence. This report talks about wildlife in the valley, wildlife corridors, and ways to reduce encounters and mortality. Events like the loss of bear 148 is not what we want Canmore to be known for. The location for this proposed development is a pinch point location where human-wildlife encounters are common due to animals using the power line as a wildlife corridor. As we all know, the current designated corridor is not functional because of the steep slopes that animals don't use, as several studies have shown. Even though the proposed development seems to be small, if we compare it to the size of Canmore or its population, it does have a big impact because of this critical endangered location. Enabling a new development in that area will cause a tremendous impact on the wildlife and its movement in the valley, not to mention the increase in human-wildlife encounters resulting in wildlife displacement and mortality. We all know, and we've all been asking for a cumulative impact assessment in the Bow Valley. This will help everybody to understand the issues and make better decisions for our community. From administrators to scientists and environmental organizations, we all understand that data-driven decisions are better to avoid unnecessary mistakes. Peaks of Grassy would have never been built if we knew back then what we know now. Finally, I would like to ask everybody here, isn't it better to give ourselves a little bit more time and make a proper, informed decision instead of rushing an approval just to regret this in the future. In this case, if this development is approved, potential impacts are irreversible. We do not need to compromise our wildlife to have a sustainable growth. When I voted for the town's administration, I trusted the ones who were elected, and I am counting on you today to decline this proposal, at least until a full cumulative impact assessment is completed. Thank you.
Thank you. What was your last name again?
Cynthia Mimoto.
Thank you. Now, I'll invite anybody who'd like to speak in support to take the mic. And anybody that's here that would like to speak in support of the application. In which case, I'll ask anybody else that would like to come take the mic and speak in opposition to take the mic. Just ask you to speak your name clearly into the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Ron Casey. I'm not sure I'm speaking the right. I was torn to get up during the neutral. Really what I want to talk about is the settlement agreement. I realize that legally the lawyers have made it very clear that there's nothing that legally binds yourselves to the settlement agreement. But legal is not the only basis by what you gauge, or I certainly hope it's not the only basis on what we gauge. Morally and ethically, the settlement agreement exists. It exists, and in fact, it's been referenced in terms of reference documents as late as this fall. So it, in fact, is still being recognized by the town of Canmore. And I realize that the current landowner, and I should explain when I say developer here tonight, I'm not talking about the current landowner, the person that I have a great deal of empathy for the situation that he is in. Settlement agreement wasn't about Peaks of Grassy. It was never about Peaks of Grassy, and that's why to simply ignore it is a difficult road to go down. The settlement agreement was a settlement between the developer, Three Sisters Resorts of the day, and the town of Canmore and this community. The settlement agreement was a much broader document. Without the settlement agreement that enabled Bylaw 198 to come forward, nothing would have occurred on Three Sisters lands. Someone was just talking about hindsight. Well, there you are. But nevertheless, it enabled that bylaw to come ahead. It had commitments on behalf of the town to work with the developer in certain cases, for example, for animal underpasses under the highway, to work with them, with the province, and so on and so forth. There was also commitments by the developer to contribute community lands when they closed road allowances, for example. But the settlement agreement also included definitions that were critical to the functioning of Bylaw 198. So I'm here to simply propose that you can't pick and choose when to recognize the settlement agreement and when not to recognize the settlement agreement. Settlement agreement had 16 sections. One section references, Section 4 references Peaks of Grassy. And simply what it says is a maximum of 45 acres and a maximum of 404 units. The developer that went ahead and sold that site sold it for development with the intent of development. There was no intent to do anything else but to develop that site when they sold it. Did so with full knowledge that they were in contravention and breaking the settlement agreement. I think it was a dangerous place for a developer to be, because then that brings into question all of the commitments in the settlement agreement, all of the commitments in Bylaw 198, and you simply can't pick and choose, depending on your agenda, when to enforce the settlement agreement. Former Mayor Craig and I spent a year working on this document, a year working on Bylaw 198, along with 2 of our planning staff and several people from Three Sisters. I know the detail that went into this. I know the thought process that went into this. I also know that it came down to literally minutes when a courier brought in a signed settlement agreement before council would deal with Bylaw 198. It had that much significance and holds that much significance. And have pieces of it fallen out of time because of changes in Bylaw 198? Yes. But the document recognized that. It said the town and the developer, if they agree, can change this thing. Well, I didn't see anybody coming forward to change from 404 or 45 acres. So that's why I'm saying I'm not really sure I'm arguing against, except I'm asking council to honor this on the basis that it is morally and ethically correct to continue to honor that settlement agreement. I just want to give a quick point on urban reserve. The reason that site is zoned urban reserve is because in 1998, virtually all the land around Canmore was zoned urban reserve, and there was no intent to build there. This was privately owned land. The developer would not authorize us to change it to WC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time I will look to see if there's anybody that would like to speak in a neutral position. And if not, then anybody that'd like to speak in support. Anybody out there that'd like to take the mic and speak in support of the application? In which case I'll invite anybody that'd like to speak in opposition to take the mic.
So it's the outcrop one?
Mr. Mayor and councillors, my name is Pierre Lambert. I live on Lawrence Grassy Ridge. I'm opposed to the proposed rezoning. I have several concerns, but I will only address one of them now, driving around the rock outcrop. My driveway is across from the outcrop in a blind spot below the crest of the hill. This hill is combined with a curve, making it very risky. When I come in and out of my driveway, I always have to be extremely careful, as cars coming over the hill are not visible until they are almost at my driveway. I have to perform some complex maneuvers to try to decrease the risk. My neighbors on the opposite side of the crest also find it risky coming in and out of their driveways. It helps that the area just across the street from our driveways, along the outcrop, is designated no parking. It was always designated no parking, but it was only designated no parking by the town some years ago, after 2 neighbors nearly collided head-on, and one of them informed the town of the near collision. Adding 5 houses with 5 driveways and the vehicular traffic associated with 10 new dwellings, including 5 suites, will make the current unsafe situation even worse for the existing residents. Even if the street was made one way, cars coming on the other side of the hill crest would not be visible to my neighbors when coming in and out of their driveways. It would be a similar problem for people coming out of the 5 proposed additional driveways. Slowing the posted speed limit would lessen the risk, but would not eliminate it, and that is if drivers respect the new limit, which is a big if. The town's website refers to a, quote, traffic impact evaluation, unquote, which was completed in 1996. This evaluation, however, could not have included the risks associated with having 5 extra homes, because in the development plans for the Peaks of Grassy, the outcrop has always been shown as having no development. By the way, this evaluation is the only traffic analysis that has been made available to the public. So I have to assume that it is the only traffic study that exists related to the Peaks area. But this analysis covered only the impact of extra traffic on Three Sisters Drive and the bridge across the Bow River. It did not evaluate any of the potential traffic problems on the streets of the Peaks development. It did not address the actual problems that we are now facing on Lawrence Grassy, caused by the hill/curve around the outcrop, the on-street parking, the high traffic volume, etc. All made much worse in the winter. I urge you to deny this application. I have a short video, just a few seconds, to illustrate the problem around the outcrop. It may not work.
Tracy, how do I close this and open the next one?
Technical difficulty. But the video is less than 30 seconds. So. The video will show a car driving west on Lawrence Grassy, going up the hill and around the outcrop. It'll give you some idea of the problems that I was talking about.
Can I open up? Can you open that file for me, please?
Coming up. Oh, can you have to click on?
I hate this mouse.
Okay, there we go. Going up the hill in the winter. Hold on, it'll pick up in a second. And the new driveways will be right where the bus has just passed, and as you are coming up on this side of the hill, you cannot see that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much yourself. It's an interesting video. Anybody that would like to speak in support? Is there anybody out there that would like to speak in support? In opposition? Ma'am? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Nancy Stinson, and I live on Wilson Way. I've lived there since 2002, and so lived through all the development that created the neighborhood that we have today. I've walked through the area of proposed development probably 1,000 times on my way to town and to the lake, and have often encountered all sorts of wildlife in there. And but when Pierre started to talk about the traffic issues, it really prompted me to stand up. I hadn't planned to talk, so forgive me if I'm a little disjointed. But the traffic situation in our neighborhood does bother me. We essentially have a one-lane street, and that goes for pretty much all of the year. And even although there's certain kinds of traffic clogging that happens in the winter because of snow and so forth, what you might not realize unless you drive up there all the time is that in the summer, that whole area where the proposed development is. Typically on a sunny summer day, that area is parked up with cars brought in by people who are going to the lake. So, and the parking of the people going to the lake starts at the beginning of the undeveloped plot of land and then goes really pretty much up the hill close to where I happen to live. And I'm not really complaining about this for my own personal, whatever impact it might have on me, but I'm just thinking about how incredibly congested it's going to be if people still come in and park there, try to park there to go to the lake when there's housing being built, and then when it finally is built and people live there. So I would ask you to decline this application. Thank you.
Thank you. This time, or from now on, I'll just invite the next person that'd like to speak to come to the mic, and you can indicate when you take the mic what position you're speaking in, support or opposed or neutral. So, ma'am.
My name is Deb Sellers, and I'm in opposition of the proposal for the change to the land use bylaw. And I live in the Peaks of Grassy, and for people who know me, you know that I'm passionate about living in the Peaks of Grassy. I like to gather people together for our annual block party, for Easter egg hunts, and just enjoy living where we do. And I think that this is an important issue, and I felt responsible to speak to it as a neighbor, but it also affects all of Canmore, and I believe the visitors to the town as well.
Excuse
now,
me,
sorry.
You should actually be addressing council.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Teacher and me, I talk to the classroom. I would, no one would argue that it's a pinch point in that area for sorry, it's not moving forward. For wildlife. I live along the power line, so we do have a lot of elk up there, we all know. We have annual bear closures in the area. We have families of deer that are in and out of the neighborhood. We have owls and woodpeckers that we can always hear out there. We also have the coyotes that we hear, fortunately the cougars that we don't hear. And in this area, it is definitely a pinch point. And so I had this picture that my daughter had taken, and I thought it was a good visual of the Peaks of Grassy and just the footprint that it has, and the footprint that might be taken if we were to be taking the trees out of there and then putting in buildings to there. And the biggest part that I see in that is just the impact that it has and how close it is to the lake and the quarry park. So you can see the buffer of trees that is currently there, and if that buffer was to be removed, it's just the biggest pinch point of anywhere. And so I can't help but assume that that area was maybe purposely made urban reserve and not developed because of the pinch point that it was, to enable more wildlife to get past that area, and also for the enjoyment of people on the trails and enjoyment of people at the lake. There you can see one small house through there, but if the development was to occur, this is a view from midway down the lake, you would be able to see multiple houses and all through the development, which would impact not just the people who live in the area, but also the people who are visiting the area. We've already talked to the safety issue, and that's probably one of my greatest concerns. And this is when you come up Peaks Drive and you take a right to go towards down the west end, and this road is narrow and lined with cars, usually on both sides. I've taught my children to drive in that neighborhood, and it's always, okay, pull over, wait for the car that's coming towards you, because we're always concerned about when you do meet people on that street. And I would be more concerned with more residences actually going into that far end as people are coming up the hills. This is a photo similar to where Pierre was talking about at the outcropping. So you can see that you can't actually see any cars that would be coming up the hills from the west end. It is quite steep. And I'm usually going this direction around, so that's why I took the picture that way, but I just wanted to show also what it looks like looking up the hill towards the outcrop. And at the outcrop, it is designated no parking, and from a safety standpoint, having walked, ran, biked, driven all around the neighborhood, I can't imagine that we would try to put driveways in that area, just for the safety and for the location that it is in the neighborhood there. So just another look of what it is there. I also feel that people who live in the neighborhood could never have imagined that this area would be developed, because we, as urban reserve, we kind of always felt that it would be set aside for as parkland. And I know that that may be misinformation on our part, but again, with the location that it is, we couldn't have imagined that once, twice, actually 3 times now, that this area has been proposed for development. And I think we're beginning to feel like we're being pushed to try to have that development pushed through. So I'd like to ask that you would protect the urban reserve land, that you would protect the wildlife corridors, that you would protect the areas and pathways and parkways for people to enjoy in the town of Canmore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that'd like to come to the mic and speak in any position?
Good evening, Mayor Borman, Town of Canmore Councillors. My name is Kathy Broder-Robb, and I live on Lawrence Grassy Ridge. I speak in opposition to the proposed bylaw, Peaks of Landing land use area. This issue has now been presented to the Town of Canmore for the 3rd time, and the proposal still does not have a strong rationale for pursuing this development. At the same time, all of the reasons why it is not an appropriate development continue to be pertinent. First, while lawyers and administrators continue to say that a legal agreement negotiated by a previous town council is no longer in effect because the clauses that govern development of the land in the Peaks of Grassy did not follow that ownership of the land, I continue to believe that the intent of the agreement still persists. There's enough documentation that the previous town council negotiated a contentious and protective agreement on behalf of citizens of Canmore and future residents of the Peaks of Grassy and Quarry Pines that was meant to limit and control development in the area and to protect natural areas within the outline of the community. I fail to see why we need to continue to pay for an error, either by omission or commission, that someone made when the lands changed ownerships. The settlement agreement was negotiated by Town of Canmore on behalf of its citizens to protect from too much development in this community, and that purpose, responsibility, and position of power that the Town of Canmore holds still remains. Second, Canmore occupies a sensitive and important ecological area. This includes the importance of wildlife corridors, a renewed understanding of the incredible power of the natural forces that continue to shape our valley, and an ethical duty to respect our responsibility to carefully consider our impact on its natural integrity. To me, this project does not provide enough advantages to Canmore to negate the impact of this development. We live on the farthest outskirts of Canmore, and this development is set to increase density at the farthest edges of town. Under no circumstances does this seem to make sense. This area is already an area of complex wildlife use, and it doesn't really matter what you label it, wildlife habitat, corridor, or whatnot. The entire town knows that there are bears and other animals in this area that are compromised when they encounter people. Many of us believe that adding to the challenges in this location is probably a decision that we, the collective town of Canmore, will regret, but it is also one that can never be undone. Third, I think we do need to talk about need. Does this development really solve a current desperate need in Canmore? Will 7 perpetually affordable houses being available for purchase in the next 2 to 3 years have a real impact? Will 4 to 5 more $1 million plus houses make Canmore a better place to live? Will row houses that will be visible from Quarry Lake help make Canmore a better place for all citizens of Canmore? Does the fact that these are local developers who can persuade and push make this a need for the town of Canmore? I believe that there were strong messages arising out of the previous negotiations about the previous bylaws that are an important lesson here. Civic responsibility, community voice, and responsible leadership are critical components for all of us as we make these decisions that will be made that have such major impact on the integrity of our neighborhood. Thank you for the opportunity to present my perspective about my neighborhood.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to take the mic at this time and speak to your perspective? Don't be shy. Come on up. Raymond. Go ahead, ma'am.
Mayor Bowerman and councillors, my name is Lavina Gilliland, and I live on Lawrence Grassy Ridge, and I'm opposed to this rezoning. I will read for Samantha Taylor, a resident of Canmore for 14 years, who is not here tonight. Her letter reads, I request you deny Peaks Landing application for rezoning. As a resident of the Peaks community and as a geological EIT, currently pursuing her professional engineering designation in the field of geotechnical consulting engineering, I see this issue through both technical and personal lenses. This amended reading of my full submitted letter focuses on the Stones Canyon Creek Development Level 2 Debris Flow Risk Assessment by BGC Engineering dated October 28, 2015. From a geological perspective, there are a number of concerns that should be given serious consideration when evaluating risk for this development. Firstly, the return period used for the report for debris floods and flows is 100 to 300 years. For comparison, incremental consequence assessments for dams consider loss of life, financial risk, and social environmental damage due to flood and earthquake hazards on return period scales of up to 1,000 or even 10,000 years. Geological processes such as sedimentation, slope movement can happen at a much greater time scale than most people are used to. To view the risk of a geological hazard on a scale of something as short as 100 years, particularly in an area of industry with comparatively developing guidelines, is to present a limited view of that risk. For dams, official consequence assessment guidelines are provided by Canadian Dam Association. Guidance of equivalent specificity and authority for debris flows was not used in the study. In addition to the short return period and limited guidance on risk assessment, the report clearly states that the number of housing units proposed by the developer calls for a Class 3 assessment. Despite this standard, only a Class 2 assessment was pursued. This represents a departure from the conservatism that is typically, and for good reason, associated with earth sciences modeling and assessment. Finally, there is always a prominent element of uncertainty in geological sciences and engineering. The geotechnical report abounds with uncertainty. Delineation of hazard zones are, as stated in the report, quote, judgment-based, unquote, and the desktop studies can easily miss important data. Evidence of debris flow are not always visible on available air photos. The frequency magnitude analysis relies on empirical work that is speculative to some degree, as debris flow volumes have not been reconstituted for the entire fan. Only 2 test pits were excavated at in the investigation, which is too low to provide significant assurance against geological variation and uncertainty. In fact, the report itself concedes that, quote, Conclusions on the debris flow frequency based on only 2 test pits are associated with significant uncertainty. Additionally, the calibration and use of numerical modeling has significant limitations in this assessment. The report states modeling results are incomplete and precursory. Calibration relied on a single event and appears to be tenuous at best. Even BGC states that, in the case of further developments, the analysis, quote, should be replaced by well-calibrated model runs, unquote. This does not inspire a high degree of confidence in the existing analysis. While eliminating uncertainty is near impossible, the inherent uncertainty in numerical modeling means is of greater importance to the use of multiple calibrating events, greater detail and ground truthing, and overall increased conservatism to reduce uncertainty. This builds an increased factor for safety into results. With the area stated to be at risk from both debris flows and floods, the event frequency is likely to increase due to climate change, the life safety, financial, and environmental risk that is being accepted here is too high given the considered level of uncertainty associated with the analysis. Your dedication to hearing these concerns is appreciated. Your Honor, if I may I add my own personal comments?
So you're reading that on behalf of...
That was a letter from Susan Taylor.
From Susan Taylor?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're welcome to...
Oh, Samantha Taylor, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Samantha Taylor?
I beg your pardon?
I'm sorry, that was Samantha Taylor?
Yes.
Then, and you'd like to give...
just my own personal note. Yeah. My family's been an active member of the community since 2005. I'm on the organizing committee for the Biathlon World Cup and invested a tremendous amount of time into this community. Our family supports many athletes by having them come and stay with us. I'm terribly concerned about the additional stress that this development could put in on our community from both parking and traffic concerns. I'm very proud to be in Canmore and see the level of athletes that we're producing out of this community. On our street, we have the highest Olympic athlete per capita than anywhere in the country. And people are training on our streets all the time. You see them roller skiing. We have signs encouraging traffic to be careful of our athletes. Our hill is often frequented by athletes training, and we're proud of that. And I'm very concerned about the additional pressure being put on our community by adding more developments and the rock outcrop. And speaking of the rock outcrop, the original development discouraged development there. It was technically difficult to develop and was purposely not developed. To develop there now means that there's going to be the need to do blasting. And now that there's other homes in the area, the risks associated with that are extremely high. And I hope you consider that.
Just not to interrupt, but I understand that blasting won't occur there, but...
That is not my understanding. But I'd like you to consider that, because if it is something that's going to be done, it should be taken very seriously. Anyhow, I would like to encourage you to deny the application. I think the risks to our community are really high. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Jan Taffel, speaking in opposition. So I've lived in Canmore over 35 years, volunteering. So dear Mayor and Councillors, in opposition of Peaks Landing, please uphold the settlement agreement as maximum housing has been reached for Peaks. This was a unanimous vote of Council with the first public hearing. Now we are at our third public hearing in 4 years. Please respect the citizens of Canmore and not build in PH with developers demanding a last-minute deal just before the last public hearing. I would like to remind you of losing Bear 148 in a subdivision so close to the Quarry Lake. Respect nature. Respect our Quarry Lakes Park designation. As I'd said in the last public hearing, Joe Milner had spoken with my son. He was 13, I believe, at the time. And Joe Milner is one that made sure that we have a designation of Quarry Lakes Natural Park. And he promised my son that there would never be a house that you would see. So there's a lot of promises that have been made. Respect our provincial judges too. If people ask where to see a bear, they are shocked that I send them to Peaks Landing area. The impact on wildlife and corridors is unacceptable. Enough is enough. So I signed this by myself and my husband, and then I PS. We've lost many friends retiring to BC. They literally have left this town and the street because of this. So I'd like to say hi to Mavis and Pierre because they're watching on video.
Thank you.
Your Worship, Council members, my name is Rachel Gauk, and I live at 973 Lawrence Grassy Ridge in Quarry Pines subdivision of the Peaks of Grassy neighborhood, and I am an original owner. I oppose the third application to rezone this urban reserve. I want to speak a little bit about the reasons that these lands are not desirable overall, and also uncertainty and risk in decision making, because to me, that's really the crux of our challenge here. I fail to see much for community benefit, but what I do see is a very high level of uncertainty and risk for our community and for our town. We pride ourselves in Canmore with having a focus on connectivity and protecting wildlife corridors and people alike, but it makes no sense to me to protect the wildlife corridors up or downstream and then seal them off in a pinch point in the middle. The Peaks is a known pinch point for wildlife in large part because the official wildlife corridor is mostly on slopes over 35 degrees in our area, making for difficult and unwanted travel. The Golder report and current wildlife data cite high incidence of human use issues in this area. And the third-party review of the EIS for this application states that, quote, an increase in human use may result in more wildlife interactions, resulting in negative conflicts where people could be injured or killed, and wildlife relocated or destroyed as a consequence of these interactions, end quote. Some have purported to support a notion of a hard edge. By way this new development is laid out, it still leaves a very large hole at the end of the cul-de-sac, allowing wildlife to come in, but now with many fewer opportunities to escape. Mike Chabot, a conservation coordinator, comments that if the goal of creating a hard edge is to exclude all wildlife, which includes bears and cougars, not just elk and deer, then the only way to do that is by installing and electrifying a 7-foot-high page wire fence. I am not proposing this. Perhaps most worrisome is the additional risk and uncertainty when we understand that the land so prized to hold the 7 PAH units is the one with flood risk. I find it unacceptable that we would consider putting our most vulnerable families in such a predicament. Understanding that the town would contribute or may contribute to an off-site berm to mitigate, the reports state that the berm itself would have a lifespan of 20 years. Who would be expected to maintain the mitigation structure and to gain all their approvals to build it? Given the creation of the mitigation put in place for Silvertip Stone Creek in 2012 and its ensuing failure in 2013, I think it's fair to say that placing our full confidence in these mitigation strategies is risky business. Finally, I want to reiterate that this is largely a market housing venture with very little control for our town, either with the pricing of the market housing. Peaks of Grassy has a history as it was an effort to create affordable housing that has not been terribly successful, to the mandatory rental suites, which no one can force a new homeowner to rent, and many do not, to the 7 PAH homeowners who are stuck with a home in a flood risk area. I see many questions about the community benefits versus the risk and uncertainty of this decision. Yes, Canmore has changed a lot over 20 years. And given how much affordable housing has been built or acquired in the last few years, Hawks Bend, Deergus Gate, Mountain Haven, this is a very different Canmore, again, just a few years down the road from the first application. When we can control the outcome of development, the success is much more likely. We have better models now for affordable housing, and it is our responsibility to use these better models and to protect our residents to the best of our ability. Your Worship, Council, I ask you to please take the necessary time to review all of this information, there's a lot of it, in order to make a good decision, one that you will be remembered for with pride, and please decline this rezoning application. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Bernie Asbell. This oral submission is authored by Barbara Bino and Peter Crabtree, who could not be here this evening. As a neighbor and friend, I am making the presentation on their behalf. Canmore today has arrived at a critical crossroads. We own a home on Lawrence Grassy Ridge in Peaks of Grassy. Like many people drawn to Canmore, we were attracted by the small, family-friendly town, the numerous outdoor recreational opportunities, the vibrant community of artists, writers, and craftspeople, the beautiful forests, streams, lakes, and river, the stunning mountain vistas, and the abundance of wildlife. As Canmore has reinvented itself from mining town to mountain community, it has sought through policy and deed to maintain a balance between its small town roots with shared community values, its uncommon status as an international destination with the resulting market demands for growth and development, and the need to preserve the intrinsic value of its natural setting. Canmore is a classic borderland community, immediately adjacent to Canada's most venerable national park and surrounded by provincial wildlands. In addition to providing ready access to outstanding recreational activities, the town also plays an important and challenging wildlife conservation role. The town occupies a critical Bow Valley transition route from park to wildlands and back, and there is frequent movement of animals into and within town limits in predictable ways according to the seasons. The town is promoted as a tranquil and peaceful place where people can refresh their spirits in nature, and as a wild, smart community that protects and preserves the wildlife that coexists here. The 3 sites proposed for rezoning are at a critical pinch point in Quarry Lake local habitat patch, where existing housing in POG to the south and Quarry Park to the north have narrowed that area. The animals have to move along the Powerline Trail. The Powerline Trail is the de facto main transit route for elk, deer, bears, and other animals. It is part of a natural bench that runs from the border of Banff National Park along the trail through the now abandoned Three Sisters Golf Course and to the development on the south side of town. Undeveloped, the sites on Lawrence Grassy Ridge provide additional room for the animals exactly at this critical pinch point. Development of the land is certain to negatively impact wildlife. The accumulation of shared information and knowledge is a defining character of human civilization. And today, there is much broader awareness in Canmore about the movement of animals and the importance of habitat conservation, how ecological systems function, and the increasing threats reduced or induced by global warming, including catastrophic fires and floods. When we bought our home in 2002, there were parcels of forested land on the north side of our street, and they were left undeveloped by design as enshrined in the 1998 Three Sisters Development Agreement with the town. In 1998, there was very good reasons not to develop the forested parcels: the desire to preserve a green space buffer around Quarry Lake Park, the ongoing risk of flooding on the western portion of the land, the problems of building homes on a rocky knoll, and the desire to preserve green space for animals. The developer's representative, Lawrence Hill, reiterated in 2002 when we bought that these parcels would never be developed. None of the conditions apparent in 1998 with regard to these parcels have changed with the passage of time. What has changed is our heightened awareness of new and worrisome threats to the community if these parcels are developed. First, the increased vulnerability of the neighborhood to catastrophic fire induced by global warming and the importance of not intensifying human occupants in the area. Second, the increased risk of catastrophic flooding in the westernmost parcel due to climate change. Third, the importance of the community of preserving the forested buffer around Quarry Lake Park so that users will enjoy views of trees and mountain peaks in the distance rather than second-story windows. And fourth, the need to preserve critical habitat for animals who regularly transition through the area. We urge you to reject the rezoning of POG Urban Reserve for the reasons we have described. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Christine Scotland. I live at 1020 Lawrence Grassy Ridge. Dear Mayor Borman and Town Councillors, I am in opposition to the proposed land use amendment for the 4-acre parcel of land in the Peaks of Grassy. This amendment would dismiss the 1998 settlement agreement, which is still a morally valid and significant document. As you are aware, and a little bit more information from Ron Casey, it was created to cap the number of units in the neighborhood and expedite the development of the Three Sisters Creek area. This was an exchange that I feel should be honored. The Peaks of Grassy is already considered one of the densest neighborhoods in Canmore. The additional dwellings proposed will bring about a 200% increase in density on the north side of the street that I live on. The traffic issues are already apparent with the number of vehicles that park on both sides of the street. The hill that a driver must approach and descend to get into the Peaks of Grassy area where the development is being proposed provides poor visibility and a blind curve. A few accidents have already occurred in this area since 2014. Increasing the density of this community will make an emergency evacuation a serious issue. I heard there was going to be a suggestion of one-way traffic in this area, and I don't believe that is a solution. As a resident in this area, I share the land base with the wildlife, and I have a responsibility to those wildlife. I also call it the holy in nature, the divine in nature, wildlife use this area as a travel corridor. The existing wildlife corridor is not ideal for wildlife movement due to the grade of the land. And I believe the 1998 settlement agreement helps protect the wildlife in the Bow Valley. These parcels of land that are adjacent to the habitat patch become a refuge for wildlife, an escape route for them, a nocturnal area for them to rest. It is a critical pinch point for wildlife. The Bow Valley, with its highways, increased land use, and expansion, makes it difficult for wildlife to travel safely. There is a need to respect the space they use. This area is also a flood risk zone, despite being a low flood risk zone, which is no loss of human life. But during a flood, a potential of having flows of muddy water to 1/2 meter deep with a fast flow of 1 meter per second is hazardous to any person. The suggested flood risk mitigation of an earthen berm is not what I want my tax dollars to go towards. The best mitigation solution is not to build. I feel that the proposed for additional PH does not suit the area due to the distance from town, and the distance to bus stops, walking distance to downtown is not ideal for young families. My next door neighbors who just recently moved with 2 young kids specifically moved out of the area because of that reason. Additional points and statements that have been made by community members opposing this bylaw to 1814 that are not included in my letter, I also agree with. These concerned community members in opposition have presented since 2014 valuable opinions, research, and documents that need to be considered in fairness. When I built in this area in 2000, it was made clear by Alpine Homes manager that no further development would occur due to the settlement agreement and the existing green space. I ask that this commitment be kept. I ask that the mayor and councillors do not approve this bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before the next speaker, thank you very much. If there is anybody out there that's thinking they'd like to speak in a neutral or supportive fashion, put your hand up. In which case we'll proceed with those who are speaking in opposition.
USB plug.
My name is Doug Latimer, and I am opposed to the rezoning of the UR lands in Peaks of Grassy on several grounds. These include that first, it is a termination of the settlement agreement negotiated by a previous council, which was intended to give residents and developers a sense of certainty regarding future development, not just in Peaks, but in surrounding regions, and it has still been enforced. Second, the proposed site has multiple risk factors due to flooding that, under the current proposal, are to be essentially offloaded onto the people of Canmore in an effort to make the development more profitable for the developers. Third, as of today, documents essential to determining the risks associated with flooding have not been released to the public, making any informed decisions regarding this application very difficult or not possible. First, Stones Canyon Creek. This drainage was first assessed by BGC Engineering in 2015. The report identified a flood risk. The study did not perform a detailed analysis. BGC was then hired to investigate mitigations. The report states, I quote, "Two wall designs have been proposed, including option 1, diversion wall designed to resist the impact forces of the expected 100 to 300 year return period surface water flows. This option is recommended by BGC. Option 2, less expensive diversion wall design proposed by the town, but not intended to resist expected impact forces associated with the 100 to 300 year return surface water flow." The report also states the town of Canmore has advised that the wall is intended to reduce the impacts of surface water flooding, but it is acceptable for the wall to be overwhelmed, outflanked, or destroyed by the 100 to 300 year return period surface water flow. Another limitation is a more detailed report outlining the nature and risk of Stones Canyon Creek has not been released. The Town of Canmore website indicates that the report should be available in late 2018. As of this hearing, the report has not yet been released to the public. How can we accurately assess the risk and potential mitigation if the essential information is not yet available? The diversion wall designed by BGC is intended to only function for 20 years, after which it will need to be repaired or replaced. Who is going to pay for the repair and the maintenance and replacement? As it requires, it's going to be the town or the people living in the region, which is essentially the town. There is a second flood threat to the proposed development. The XYZ Creek's hazard risk assessment was only released publicly 7 days ago. This is not enough time for the public to review and fully absorb the information. During the public hearing, the presenting engineer stated that flooding from Z Creek would likely only be nuisance flooding and in the proposed development. Nuisance flooding is defined as surface water under 11 centimeters in depth. This does not sound like very much, but stagnant and flowing water will ruin the basement and ground floor of a home. Under the new guidelines for construction in flood zones, the PAH housing will require additional construction, elevation, deflection, or reinforcement considerations, another cost that must be absorbed by the people of Canmore or the homeowners. Insurance companies in the United States are now reporting that nuisance flooding has become one of their largest expenses. Repetitive claims for flood damage over $1,000 are now on par with major natural disasters in terms of annual losses. This is another PAH owner expense. More importantly, the report identifies a risk to human life that is currently unacceptable to town standards. The most affordable and easiest mitigation is to lengthen and heighten the existing retaining wall on Wilson Way. This mitigation will change the flow pattern of surface water and likely increase both the frequency and intensity of floodwater reaching the proposed development. Before any new development can be allowed, the town needs to understand how protecting existing homes will affect the undeveloped land. This information is not in the report. The presenting engineer also stated that the impacts of Stones Canyon Creek and Z Creeks are aggregate. This means they are independent threats with the intensity and frequency of each creek flooding must be considered independently and the risks are cumulative. Given the lack of available information, additional costs associated with building a retaining wall for Stones Canyon Creek, expanding the retaining wall above Wilson Way, additional construction costs to address nuisance flooding in the PA housing on site, and cumulative costs from minor but repetitive flood damage, this development presents a high social and economic hazard to the people who would be living here. In all good conscience, can we put perpetually affordable housing on such high-risk piece of land and leave these people so vulnerable to future economic risk? If the developers honestly think that Site 1 is suitable for retail housing, then let them build their houses on Site 1 and cover all the associated costs and risks. If you decide to move forward, Site 2 should be used for PA housing. The people of Canmore should not be accepting all of this risk for the developer's benefit.
Thank you. Ma'am, thanks very much, Doug.
My name's Heather Lawson. Good evening, Mayor Borman and members of council. I moved to Peaks of Grassy in July of 2018. When I purchased my house, I was well aware of the potential development and I was supportive of it. I understand PAH and understand that we need it. It wasn't until living in the neighborhood that I realized how important the sites were, as well as the Powerline Trail is for the wildlife in the Bow Valley. It's not uncommon to see a herd of elk relaxing in the trees on sites 1 and 2, and I regularly come across the deer and coyote that call the Powerline Trail home. I frequently walk through the Powerline Trail to get to Quarry Lake, and often this summer was told by other walkers that they just saw a bear head in the trees to watch out where I go. One day I was hiking on the north side of the valley, so the opposite side of the valley, with a friend. We came across an opening in the trees and looked out. I could see town, I could see Quarry Lake, and I could see an obvious wildlife corridor. And right in the middle of the wildlife corridor was my neighborhood, Peaks of Grassy. The neighborhood was clearly out of place and very obviously disrupting the corridor. The neighborhood I live in should have never been built. I understand that Canmore needs affordable housing. However, there are other areas that it could be put without jeopardizing this important wildlife corridor. I ask you to consider other options, as development is something that cannot be undone. I'm trying to understand why building this area is a good idea. The area could accommodate 7 PAH units. However, I find it hard to understand why these units are being put in such a critical wildlife habitat. Thank you for listening, and please consider my concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Kendi?
Mr. Mayor, councillors, I was convinced that I won't speak here.
Sorry, John, do you want to just speak into the mic?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
I was convinced I won't speak here, but I couldn't resist not to tell you a Happy New Year, belated New Year. I will be alive this year, so I will make it happier for you. Just to wake everybody up. Baby, that's why I came. Let me first of all say a few words about the developer's presentation. It's a nice thing that one of the developers is with us and living in the area. I only think what I didn't hear. I heard that he's a neighbor within the neighborhood, but I didn't hear. John, once this is developed,
John,
will he...
Mr. Kennedy, can you address council, please?
Oh, I would. What I didn't hear that after this development, how long he's going to stay within the area. That would be an interesting thing. I came here because I didn't know which side I am talking to. So I thought if I said both 3 sides, I got 15 minutes. Your decision is very, very confusing. Your idea was, and the previous council will build affordable housing. Number 1, you're building and you're allowing lake view lots and housing because you're taking away 5 meters of screen, which are screening this area from the Quarry Lake. Now, wildlife, saving the crown from wildlife, you're taking off all those trees, 5 meters. What it makes, increase the property value because they have a nice view now. You had an idea that you're going to have mandatory suites, except those mandatory suites, we don't know who's going to have it, and obviously increasing the lot value because you go from R1 to R2, from R2 to R3. Those mandatory suites will be built for the grandchildren, kept empty, but we lost the landscape on front of the building and we exchanged it to concrete. Yeah, we couldn't use enough rocks for the Love Canal for the Cougar Creek, so we're going to use their cement now over there. Makes it very, very friendly. And as far as the flood concerns, don't you know that Trump has problem with the wall? So leave it alone. That wall cost us money forever. It's just as that Cougar Creek started off at $20 million. Now we're up to $45 million. And that structure designed where? In Austria. Very nice help. People in Canmore are not getting flood insurance in an area which is declared flood hazard or fringe. I am one of them. Are we building now affordable homes more in an area where they can't get insurance, or the insurance, for your information, is $1,000 per $100,000? What we're talking about now is a situation where the previous council couldn't make up their mind. I hope you didn't make up your mind, and I'm sure, up till now. So let me ask you, and you don't have to answer, what about this affordable few homes, handful of homes? Is that the town is guaranteed that they're going to build that? They bought the property already? Or what is the story? Because it's nowhere it's been mentioned how much it's going to cost. Not for us, but for the renters. And one more thing, 56 signatures. When I said at Bagels, my house is for sale for PH Homes, I had 100 signatures if I want to. When I phoned them back how much, I didn't have one volunteer who said, I'm going to talk to you when they heard the price. So without knowing the price, you can get lots of signatures. See you in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Sir.
Mayor Borman, councillors, my name is Mark Grumman, and I feel a little bit responsible for the fact that we're even here today. When my wife and I decided, after this council approved this rezoning by a 5-2 margin, that we just didn't feel that councillors and the mayor had listened and appreciated the pitches that were made at the time of the application and the submissions that were made of those opposed, and decided to challenge the town in court. We knew we were fighting an uphill battle. However, as you all are certainly aware, Council's previous decision to rezone this parcel was quashed by the Court of Queen's Bench. Justice Gates decided that by failing to follow your own rules, the town's process was so devoid of procedural fairness as to bring the administration of justice into disrepute. Such a clear rebuke from an independent justice, I truly hope, will send a strong message to council to listen carefully to what you hear from your citizens, to give thoughtful and respectful consideration, and do the right thing because you've been given a second chance. I want to also be clear that Justice Gates specifically did not rule that council's earlier decision with respect to flood risk was reasonable, contrary to what the mayor has suggested. The justice made no such decision because he didn't have to make a decision on that. He found that the procedural bylaw, or town's procedural bylaws had not been followed, and he quashed on that basis, leaving open a future challenge, which hopefully we won't have to go to, of the town failing to properly consider and weigh the evidence against the development, the overwhelming evidence against this development, some of which you've heard today. I'm going to address very briefly, because I only have 5 minutes. I'm not going the issue of the flood zone and building of the PAW units in a flood zone. The flow from Stones Canyon Creek and Z Creek will result in a high likelihood of water damage. This is a quote from the reports, potentially damaging to people on foot and vehicles. It does say, though, that those who are going to be living in the affordable housing units, which you're going to place there at the developer's request, will have a way to mitigate it themselves. They can suggest that owners stay out of basements and downslope facing main floors in times of heavy rain. So I noticed that the drawing that we saw of the building makes it at least comfortable to know that there's a second story that they can go to when heavy rains hit. It sounds funny, but we all know the disaster that this town went through when the mitigation failed in 2013. It's bad enough that the town allowed our home in the Peaks to be built within a flood zone when perhaps the risk was not known. Why would any reasonable council even consider building in this area with the knowledge now available, and to do so, in my respectful submission, is grossly negligent? And to suggest that the province or the federal government might provide financial assistance when a flood hits and people are badly hurt, to me is unbelievable, unconscionable, and really compounds the earlier bad decisions that were made to build in the Peaks in the first place. It's understood that there can be flood mitigation, but for purposes of this application, the type of mitigation, the location of the mitigation, and the cost and who's going to pay for that mitigation has not been addressed. But what has been addressed is that Alberta Environment and Parks has confirmed that such mitigation must be approved by the province in advance, regardless of where you build it, and that process is likely to take months or years with appeals considered. So what does that mean for perpetual affordable housing, which supposedly is the reason why this matter is even being properly considered by council again, is that there isn't going to be any perpetual affordable housing built. If there was, I challenge you to suggest to the developers that instead of giving up the parcel where PAW is supposed to be built, if there's no perpetual or affordable housing commenced within a certain period of time, ask them to give up one of the other parcels for affordable housing, one of the parcels that's safe and not in a flood zone. I'll guarantee you they will not agree to that because they have no intention of building the affordable housing. They're going to leave that to you and the town of Canmore taxpayers to do it. I wish I had a lot more time. I put in months and years of my life dealing with this matter, and I welcome the opportunity, and I have a lot more to say about it, but I know that my 5 minutes is up, and I thank you for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jordan Gruman, and as you can imagine, I'm also opposed to the Peaks development that's being discussed here today. I have a letter from Ernie Mattern, who is a Peaks resident, which I'd like to read for council, if I may. Honorable elected representatives of Canmore residents, I have a vision. It becomes clearer to me on a day this week when many millions of people were talking about the greatness of Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision and determination against formidable foes. My vision isn't as inspiring or affects quite as many people as Dr. King, as it only applies to Canmore, but it is quite simple. I envision a Canmore that cares about wildlife and the environment, a Canmore that values the beauty of the Bow Valley and its green spaces, a Canmore where the views of its residents are listened to and considered, a Canmore that values the integrity of agreements that it enters to protect its citizens and residents, a Canmore that honors and behaves in such a way that is consistent with its core values of wellness, respect, integrity, service, and teamwork. The Peaks of Grassy is the highest human-wildlife conflict area in Canmore. This is because the official corridor up mountain from the Peaks has an average slope of 35 degrees that renders it largely unattractive and unused by wildlife. Most wildlife takes the much easier route through the power line corridor, as we've seen from the numerous pictures tonight. The Peaks neighborhood, in retrospect, should not have been built because it was built in a wildlife corridor at the time, but we shouldn't compound that error of the historical nature by adding more development, by essentially adding insult to injury. Every new development, however small or large, has a negative effect in the most critical wildlife pinch point. If we close this corridor or pinch point, then all the work on the corridors north and south of that area is entirely irrelevant. Alberta Environment and Parks has recognized the problems with the wildlife corridor in this area and have told me that the relocation alignment of the corridors will be undertaken in the near future. The settlement agreement was what the residents of Peaks use as assurance when buying their land and building homes in the neighborhood to protect our green spaces. If the town dismisses the intent of the agreement to protect its residents, then why does it honor the agreement to give a benefit to a developer, the Three Sisters Company that didn't exist in 1998, as it has done as recently as last year? Former council voted to unanimously turn down the development application for this land that included 2 additional PAW units in 2015. But for a total of 7 PAW units, the same council approved the application in 2016. Why give the message to the developers in the community that a certain amount of PAW in a development application, that previous agreements don't have to be honored? My last point is about the CCHC agreement with developers. It is a flawed agreement from the town's perspective. Site 1, which is included in the agreement, is subject to flooding because of issues related to permits or permissions required by the province. Before building walls or berms to help prevent flooding, the land may not be able to be developed at all. In that case, the town, through CCHC, would likely have bought a land for $10 but not be able to build PAW, which is the carrot that the developer has dangled in exchange for rezoning 2 sites, or sites 2 and 3. If rezoned, those sites are instantly worth over $5 million that the developers bought for $325,000. The result would be that the developers get a huge windfall profit and the town gets no additional PAW housing. The result would be no benefit to the town or its residents in spite of all the negative impacts to wildlife, public safety, road safety, parking, and in addition, a very much diminished trust in our elected representatives in exchange for the profit and greed of the developers. It's no accident that the developer didn't offer CCHC sites 2 or 3. Those plots have market value if they're rezoned, but site 1 does not. If the developer was obliged to build PAW units before sites 2 and 3 are rezoned, then it would be much fairer agreement. As our elected representatives, you have an extremely important decision to make regarding this application. If you vote no, you show you understand the negative impacts on wildlife of this development. You understand the overwhelming majority of residents are against this application. You understand the 1998 settlement agreement was relied on by residents to protect the green space in the neighborhood. And you understand that if you vote yes, the only real positive impact is to enrich a group of developers who betrayed the trust of their friends and neighbors. If you vote no, you help preserve the trust that the residents have placed in you. That ends the letter. I notice I have 22 seconds. As you might imagine, as the son of Mr. Grumman who just spoke passionately, I've heard about this issue for a number of years. I just would like to comment to the council, that agreement, whether it is legal or moral or ethical, it gives you all of the leverage here. Why are you giving the developer the right to give you a flood zone when you could have all the affordable housing you could want if that's truly what you're after? Thank you. That concludes my time.
Mayor Borman and Canmore Council. My name is Jill Asbell and I reside at 1041 Lawrence Grassy Ridge. I oppose Bylaw 2018-14 Land Use Amendment, Peaks Landing. I've said all along the upside to these messy development applications is that we've met and gotten to know all of the incredibly talented, professional, and kind neighbors in the Peaks of Grassy. That will never change. What has changed in our neighborhood is the heightened awareness to the now forever threat of wildland-urban interface fire up on the mountain where we live, the potential for a catastrophic forest fire. Climate change, low humidity, high winds, and the firestorms, these very natural phenomena wildfires cause, create havoc and loss of life and destruction. The fires aren't getting closer to homes, homes are getting closer to fires. The community members of Peaks of Grassy, particularly those of Quarry Pines, a resort recreation community, are well versed in the problems that further development will have. I will let those opposed, as they are, make their arguments that our family wholeheartedly agree with, in that their research, expertise, and passion will tell. High density is the single biggest threat to destruction and loss of life in a wildfire situation, as evidenced around the world. At this time, there are over 310 people living in the west end of the Peaks who will be at risk for evacuation. To that, the developers want to further densify with 30 more residences. This increased population and number of vehicles that come with this further density are the very western end of the development and farthest from a viable evacuation route from the neighborhood. Urban planning design should focus on infill development in our core areas where wildfire threat is lower and people have access to jobs, public transport, and evacuation routes. Public safety issues are exacerbated by unreliable infrastructures. Most of our homes were built before Fire Smart was in the Alberta Building Code. Evacuation from wildfires can be life-threatening, and having safe plans in place beforehand is not always enough. Reliance on guidelines and fire-safe building planning codes without sufficiently analyzing site-specific conditions can lead to a false sense of safety and preparedness. Wildfire risk cannot be addressed with a one-size-fits-all solution. Lightning strikes are the most unpredictable threat of wildfire around Canmore, and second is human ignition. You cannot know when this will happen. Council, you have stated that we have 2 exits to evacuate from the Peaks. In reality, getting to that first exit at Peaks Drive would be an extreme challenge, let alone getting to the far eastern locked gate exit if you're trying to drive out of the Peaks. The 35 days a year within the very high or extreme fire danger levels, when winds on these days are predominantly from the southwest and west, are the days that see the greatest number of vehicles in the Peaks due to the summer holiday time. The truth is, you cannot outrun an approaching forest fire, but you may have a chance of survival if you can drive away from the fire, as evidenced in Fort McMurray in 2016. Further development in the Peaks will add a significant volume of vehicles, thereby exacerbating any real chance of escaping the Peaks in a wildfire situation. Both exits lead everyone to the same single road, whether you're escaping at Peaks Drive or the Eastern Lock Gate. If the mobile sprinkler truck the town owns can't get close to the situation due to road blockage and lack of advance warning time for responding, any assistance will be negated, and that unit will not be the only one trying to get into the area. In the ensuing chaos, let's not forget the citizens trying to get in to rescue family, members, pets, and possessions. It truly boggles the mind that planning departments, along with municipal councils, particularly in North America, continue to approve rezoning so that development can occur where it's realistically one way in and one way out. Such planning sets up a community for failure of evacuation in an emergency such as a wildfire. You cannot fix the problem of only one exit without further desecrating the landscape and disrupting the wildlife to what ends we will not know. The recent fires in Paradise, California moved at a pace of 80 football fields a minute at their peak burn time. Imagine the horror of that for a moment. Even with fairly accurate weather predictions, the reality of a wildfire can be much worse. Wildfire behavior maps can only show where the potential areas exist that, given a wildfire, could be of an extreme nature. Canmore is pretty much surrounded by such a potential, as evidenced in our Town of Canmore guiding documents, Wildfire Mitigation Strategy. Placing more density in a fire-prone natural area without thoroughly considering consequences regarding wildfire risk is reckless and a dereliction of your duty to the public. I got one more second. You have to know how to get your people out of a high-density area to save lives. Quoting from the town's The Mining the Future document, the idea that if the consequences of an action are unknown but are judged to have some potential for major or irreversible negative consequences, then it is best to avoid taking that action. Based on what I've said tonight, I respectfully request that you decline the proposal to rezone the urban reserve in the Peaks of Grassy. Thank you for your kind consideration of this opposition. It is appreciated.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship. Oh. Good evening, Your Worship and Council. My name is Dawn Hunt, and I oppose this rezoning. It is clear through the presentations this evening, and indeed from the two previous public hearings on the proposed rezoning of this urban reserve, that there are many indisputable factors that require acceptance of risk, and in the case of flood risk, costly mitigation measures that are yet to be fully determined. It seems that a common position in favor is that these risks and costs are acceptable in order to achieve the Comprehensive Housing Action Plan, or CHAP, stated goal of providing approximately 1,000 affordable housing units. You, Your Worship, have referred to this number often as a keystone requirement, as recently as your support for Canmore Olympic Village. It should be noted that in 2008, CHAP stakeholder, then Mayor Ron Casey, expressed concern that, quote, numbers in the action plan will be taken as definitive. There needs to be some indication in the plan that they are estimates or targets, unquote. Accordingly, the current CHAP 2011 includes a section titled Monitoring, Measuring, and Implementation. Paragraph 5 of this section states, every 2 to 3 years, or as determined by the CHAP stakeholder group, the stakeholder group shall reconvene to review and evaluate progress with respect to plan objectives. Should there be substantive deviations from the timelines outlined in this plan, then the stakeholders shall reconvene to reevaluate the plan priorities and action items to determine how adjustments can be made to reach desired objectives. At that time, any recommendations may be made to Council with respect to the plan, its action items, and objectives. I have confirmed with Manager of Planning and Development, Mr. Fish, that this review has never been conducted and that, quote, there are no minutes or other documents to share related to CHAP, and there is no new version of CHAP, so it remains as a document used for planning purposes, unquote. I am not disputing that there is an affordable housing problem in Canmore. What I am questioning is that a notional target number from a document that has not undergone its prescribed review criteria, that is not supported by any substantive research, is a valid argument for the acceptance of all the risks and costs for the meager augmentation of the 7 PAH in the Peaks of Grassy. Nevertheless, since 2015, the last time we were here, the numbers of PAH and other affordable housing options has vastly improved. I've attached a summary to my submission, but in the interest of time, the PAH equity stock has grown from 44 to 144 approved, acquired, and/or built. Rental stock has grown from 60 to 148. And quite significantly, we now have 356 additional built or approved market rental apartments. The addition of these market units will most likely impact supply and demand and will at least hold fast rental units, or rental rates, if not result in a lowering of rents. The 2011 CHAP also called for CCHC to, quote, consider the purchase of market residential or commercial accommodation units that are listed for sale, end quote. For some time, it has been known that the resale of units in the visitor accommodation zoning has been impacted by the economy and new lending rules. Have these units remained empty or underutilized by vacationers when Canmore families do without? Your Worship, at a face-to-face meeting with Peaks residents on the 16th of November 2015, it was suggested to you that 7 PH in the Peaks is a drop in the bucket, to which you responded, quote, you're right, it is a drop in the bucket, unquote. I respectfully ask you all, is this drop in the bucket towards a goal that has not been progressively monitored and measured as prescribed in the CHAP worth the risks, costs, community upset, and selective abandonment of the Peaks portion of the 1998 settlement agreement? The latter being the unanimous basis for Council's rejection of the first attempt at this rezoning. Planning for the future and the decision to bring resources out of reserve must be based on confidence that to do so would be the best solution at the right time. This rezoning is simply not a valid answer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Your drive's not working. Oh, shoot. Oh, no.
Mayor John Borman and town councillors, my name is Keith Hunt, and I live in the Peaks of Grassy. And I have submitted a written submission, but tonight I'm reading a letter from Peter Guzman, who could not be here this evening. Mayor John Borman and town councillors, I'm opposed to rezoning bylaw 2018-14 Land Use Amendment Peaks Landing. Because of my experience during the 2013 floods here in Canmore, I question the wisdom of a proposed development in a flood risk area. In 2013, the condominium building I lived in at Silvertip during the flooding sustained devastating damage. A dry creek bed to the west of my building filled with runoff waters and then jumped its banks, changing course, pouring directly into both pinnacle buildings. As I looked down into the cul-de-sac from my third-floor window, I saw a stream covering the road, which in an instant turned into a river, complete with rapids. Seeing this, I immediately descended the stairs to check on what was happening below, only to find water pouring into the stairwell. I opened the door to the hallway, a floor below mine, to find a steady flow of water moving down the carpeted hallway. Further down at the entrance foyer, next to the elevator, the waters were already calf deep. In the parkade, the water level was just below the door line of our vehicles. My wife and I had just enough time to drive the vehicles out before any water entered them. The 5-story condominium building next door was sustaining worse damage. The elevator filled with water, creating enough pressure to burst open the doors. A corner unit was ravaged by river boulders that busted through the windows and literally filled the condo with a deep layer of huge rocks. The force and power to move those boulders was unexpected, coming from the perpetually dry creek bed. When I tell people of my experience, they express surprise in learning that there was flooding also at Silvertip, not only at Cougar Creek. My understanding is that there was mitigation put in for the potential of flooding. Whatever flood mitigation was in place failed miserably. It failed for the simple reason that floodwaters are wild and unpredictable. Excuse me. They can't be tamed. And yet we rely on mitigations to do just that. I'm not an expert on flood mitigation, but I feel it accurate to say there is no way of knowing if a particular flood mitigation is going to be effective. It's a gamble. After experiencing firsthand the power of floodwaters moving through buildings I lived in and through the housing developments in my community, after supporting an anxious homeowner trying to save his home from the rising waters, after seeing homes fall into Cougar Creek from a bluff overlooking the river, after cycling through town in deep waters to see the extent of flooding in areas around town, I wonder how it is that we are again considering a proposal on a flood risk site. And the sole reasoning for allowing it to proceed is flood mitigation, mitigation that no one knows is going to function. Whether it is safe and suitable to build a housing development in a flood risk area after seeing what happened in many areas around Canmore and Alberta is not reasonable. I know that all of us who witnessed and experienced the catastrophe in Canmore learned something about the power and unpredictability of floods. How can we intentionally mislead ourselves and others into believing we can control nature's forces when we clearly cannot? I think of the homes that are planned for this flood risk site. These are not the expensive million-dollar homes, but instead the PAH homes, the homeowners who are least able to afford the loss and damage from flooding. They're the ones expected to live in a flood risk zone. Will prospective buyers be informed they are buying in a flood risk zone? If there is a known flood risk, will they be able to afford the insurance? Let's remember what we have learned, seen, and experienced from the 2013 flooding. Let's not gamble on the uncertainty of flood mitigation's effectiveness. Assuming that the province will bail out our PAH homeowners when the floodwaters do come is reckless and negligent. Signed, Peter Guzman, Peaks of Grassy, Canmore. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tracy, can I just pull that out?
Your files
I'm a
open in your whole room.
I'm a map. I'm a map.
There's these things, right? One of these is like
I'll pass that down for a refill. soon as they're done. At 7.
Oh, okay.
This one here as well. You're the blue one, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
What's that? Why?
There we go. Great. Honorable Mayor Borman and members of council, thank you for your time spent listening and your time considering these issues tonight and in the days ahead. I oppose this rezoning bylaw.
Sorry, what's your name, sir?
Sorry, my name is Dave Lawson. I live in the Peaks of Grassy neighborhood. We came to Canmore for the mountains, the forests, and the wildlife. People live, work, and visit the Bow Valley because of the renowned world-renowned natural environment. We need to consider this in all development decisions. I've spent meaningful time hiking, cycling, dog walking in and around the peaks. I understand where the real wildlife corridor is and how important this urban reserve site is to that corridor. I've regularly encountered wildlife on these sites on almost a daily basis. I could cover many reasons to oppose this rezoning, but I will focus on making just 3 points. Point 1 is that human-wildlife coexistence is a significant issue in the Bow Valley. We're right next to Banff National Park, UNESCO World Heritage Site. And to the east is Kananaskis. The peaks in this site we're talking about tonight are right in the heart of the wildlife corridor on the south side of this great valley. Wildlife movement and human-wildlife encounters are important, as evidenced from this statement on the Town of Canmore's website. There is concern among residents, elected officials, and wildlife managers that growth and development in the Bow Valley is leading to more frequent encounters. We must reduce the risk to both humans and wildlife from the Town of Canmore website. Also evidenced, the Bow Valley Human-Wildlife Coexistence Roundtable, a project of the Town of Canmore, the Town of Banff, the province of Alberta. I'd like to thank Mayor Borman and Mr. Fark for serving on this important project. What I share here is 2 quotes from your report. Animal movement is fundamental to ecosystem function and species survival. Throughout the Bow Valley, the ability to support wildlife has been reduced by loss, fragmentation, and alteration of key habitats due to human development. From your report. Also, from your report, corridor effectiveness depends on a number of factors, including the quality of habitat within and adjacent to the corridor and the nature of the corridor. The key variables that can be controlled are the proximity of human development and levels of human use, also from your report. The Peaks of Grassy, not only is coexistence important, the Peaks of Grassy is stated as the highest area of conflict in Canmore. Bear 148, I won't tell the story, but the point I'd like to make is this bear was not on the steep, rugged terrain south of our community. This bear was on the Powerline Trail, right near Quarry Lake, right by these sites, when he was captured and relocated, and we know how it ended. This past summer, this black bear was in the forested lands that we're talking about tonight and along behind the houses on the Peaks of Grassy. I stopped and spoke to the officers that day. This bear also was relocated from our neighborhood. The area in question may be small, but it's critically important. The real corridor is the narrow space along the power line trail. That's the real corridor that's used by wildlife on our side of the valley. This is clearly your decision. No one is denying that. It's a decision with competing priorities. On one side, irreversible development in the wildlife corridor. On the other side, units of PAH housing. I see that being the other side of the decision based on previous council and unanimous defeat of this resolution with only 2 units and then passing with 7. It clearly shows it's an issue of competing priorities between these two sides. And I ask you to consider that in your choice. Your choice. Wildlife movement is clearly an important issue. The Peaks of Grassy is right in a critical corridor. Wildlife use the power line trail in these forested sites every day. Rezoning and development is irreversible. Irreversible. I believe you have better options. I believe there are better choices. There are other sites in the Bow Valley. I know you can find a better way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Now, at this time, we're going to take a very short break, and we will be short. And it's our practice to break every 2 hours to give people a chance to stretch their legs and use the washroom. So I encourage you not to leave. We won't be long. If everybody could take a seat, please.
I didn't make Bill Summers. Get your own.
Okay. Hello. Hello. Thank you. At the back there, Mr. Casey. If only I had a gavel, but he took it. No, he took it. Okay, we'll call the public hearing back to order. And just before we go back into the lineup, I once again will give anybody who wants to speak in a supporting or neutral way the opportunity to speak now. If there's anybody. Sir.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Peter Musil. Oh, right. I should say I'm on the CCHC board for a few years now. Don't want any letters being sent anywhere. I'm going to speak in neutral for this. I don't know much about the settlement agreement, but I believe if there is a legal binding agreement, it should be followed. I'm not a lawyer, so I'll let the lawyers pass judgment on that agreement. I haven't read it. But as far as the development goes, for the development, I think it's a good area for development, and it has all the services pulled up right to it. Tonight I'm speaking as a citizen of the town. I've been in the Bow Valley for about 12 years, and I've only lived in Canmore for about 3 of those, and that's partly because it was so difficult to find housing for a young family. I think this development would make that availability, that supply more, by having these types of units available, and I think it's a great opportunity. I was listening to all the comments about wildlife and fire and flood, and I just couldn't help to think that there's wildlife everywhere. They're in my backyard. They're in the parks. They're going to go where they're going to go. As far as the fires go, there's both sides to it. Are trees more combustible than houses? And you can argue both sides. I just look at this application as a rezoning application. The development permit will be the time to deal with what development actually goes there and what flood mitigation needs to be done for that development to actually happen. But this is a rezoning application, and I think you need to just focus on that. So I'm just going to end it there, and I'm in support of the development aspect of it, but if there is a legal binding agreement, then I think that needs to be followed too. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to speak next?
Hey, my name's Naya. I grew up here.
Sorry, what was your last name?
Noise West.
Sorry?
Noise West.
Noise, thank you.
So I studied the application of ecological patterns and principles to community economic development. And so that looking at community economic development as an ecological system. Well, there are many very real and true environmental, legal, and social reasons this proposal should not be passed. Given the town's previous actions on similar and the very same case, they do not matter. What matters to you who make these decisions is your ability to look like you can create a commercial resort city that is affordable, sustainable, at the same time. Unfortunately, given current tactics, such as reflected in this case, that won't work. Perpetually affordable housing does not work in the way you think it does. Building PAH in Canmore is like stocking a freshwater pond with saltwater fish. The fish do not belong in that environment. Once they're all fished out, you will have to restock. It's not sustainable. In order for the fish to be naturally occurring creature in that environment, you have to change the qualities of the pond. In order to make affordable housing a naturally occurring creature in our market, you have to change the qualities of the market, using policies like rent control, limiting house sizes below 2,500 square feet, B&B regulations that allow people to legally rent suites to low-income residences, vacancy taxes, and tax breaks for people who purchased their home when their property values were low and cannot afford the current market value of their home. The Canmore Community Housing Corporation was established in the year 2000. Anyone who has lived in this town since the year 2000 knows that affordability in Canmore has gone down and not up. This strategy has not worked for the past 19 years. It's not going to work for the next 19 years. Certainly not if for every 7 affordable houses our taxes build, we get stuck with 20 unaffordable houses. If sustainability, our mountain culture, and our mountain aesthetic, and affordability are all equally important to our community, and if council truly seeks to be a leader in these areas, why are we destroying important pieces of our culture and the habitat that we respectfully share with our quiet, passive, and sometimes endangered species, the wildlife, in exchange for housing that is not affordable and will not solve our affordability problem? Residences comprise the bulk of our carbon emissions as a town. The town has never completed a cumulative environmental assessment which covers the entire area of Canmore and all its developments. The only document we have that truly involved everyone's voice, the Mining the Future Visioning document, is a far cry from what is happening here today and what is being proposed in this development. The only housing that should be being built should be affordable. Even better, council should be implementing policies that decrease the cost of existing housing, policies that change the qualities of our market so that affordable housing becomes a naturally occurring creature. The failure to implement such policies in the past, the challenge is to do so today, and pushback from the wealthiest people in this town who dominate every aspect of our discourse and society today is no excuse for spending taxpayers' money and community and wildlife habitat on developments that do not solve our affordability problem and never ever will. As an elected council responsible for understanding and taking care of the community you are meant to represent, your job is not to provide individual homes for individual people. Your job is not to provide jobs for certain dominating groups in our community. Your job is not to disrespect your own bylaws, guiding documents, or decisions made by our justice system. Rather, your job is to look at the bigger picture, to listen to your constituents, your community, and scrutinize your own policies and those brought to you by administration by comparing solid examples of their long-run effects with the values of your community. In the small picture, CCHC and developments like this may provide individual homes to individual people. But the bigger picture tells a different story, a story of our affordability, natural capital, and sustainability all decreasing in step with your promotion of our community and natural assets and cultural values as merely commercial entities to be bought and sold. In 1987, a pair of sociologists did a study on the strength on the strength of place-based meanings. They showed that successful land developers must teach the local community and local decision makers to value economic-based place meanings such as growth, employment, and commodity exchange, including such as that proposed today, and to devalue other non-economic meanings such as sentimentality, social networks, or environmental values. The effect is to cause decision makers to misperceive very real and serious threats to community cohesion, sustainability, and risk. Before you make your decision today, and as you listen to the proponents from either side, I ask that council genuinely consider whether your judgment is being compromised by such tactics. I ask that you consider whether you are devaluing the very real risks.
I'm sorry, Miss, are you able to bring it to a close?
Yes.
Thank you.
I ask that you consider whether you are devaluing the very real risks that were presented to you. Risks of natural disasters, of flooding, risks to the environment, risks to our culture. There were so many presented here today. I wonder if you are devaluing those and losing community cohesion, environmental sustainability, and risk of natural disasters in the name of perpetually affordable housing, an initiative that has failed for the past 19 years. Thanks.
Thank you. Steve?
Mayor and Council, my name is Steve DeKaiser. I'm a resident of Canmore. In fact, I was a resident and planner in the planning department in 1998 when this infamous settlement agreement was signed. And I'm going to encourage you to look at the settlement agreement not as an obstacle or a problem, but as an opportunity. And it's an opportunity for council to be in the driver's seat, a unique opportunity. There's nowhere else within the town of Canmore where the town has this kind of agreement in place that puts you in the driver's seat. The agreement is very clear. There should be no development in this area because Peaks of Grassy is built out unless that development is community housing. So that's the starting point that I hope all of you will begin with when you're considering this bylaw. Again, this train has been on the track for 3 or 4 years, but it appears to me that council has not been in the driver's seat. And the settlement agreement can put you in the driver's seat if you lead and if you have courage to do so. I have submitted a more detailed presentation to Ms. Hyde, but I just want to hit a couple of highlights. Why would council want to unsettle a 20-year-old agreement? You've got a settlement agreement. Why unsettle it? This is a unique opportunity. The applicant suggests in the application that this will provide a number of opportunities in addition to a mere 7 PAH for things like attainable housing, mortgage helpers. Let's be realistic. In the area of $1 million half duplexes in town, people buying $1 million duplexes do not need mortgage helpers. They may build suites, but they may not be renting out those suites. Because unless CCHC has some control over that residential unit, the town has no control over price. The town has no control over who rents the suites if they are built. The town has no control over the locals or second homeowners who buy these units. It's not your fault. That's just the facts. And again, that 20-year-old agreement says community housing. So please think about what community housing would mean. The applicant knew the requirements in the settlement agreement when he started looking at developing this property. The settlement agreement explicitly, and I've cited the verse and copied it in the written submission, settlement agreement allows council to enforce the agreement on future owners. You can require the current developer to take on the obligations that Three Sisters undertook in 1998. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the last 3 or 4 years about whether the settlement agreement is legally binding. And of course, it's not. You know, if 2 parties agree they want to change it, you change it. However, there was an important decision being made, created, in this case, a number of potential community housing units. The other thing I think I want to make sure council is clear of, you are also not bound by the last council's decision. This is a new council. The last council approved a bylaw that's, I'm not sure if it's identical or just very similar. You are not bound by that decision. The applicant has submitted something similar. You can say no, and you don't need a reason to say no. You have plenty of reasons, including the settlement agreement, which requires community housing. So please, I hope you'll have the patience and the courage and take the leadership to look at what should be developed, if anything, in this portion of your community and of our community.
Thank you.
Mayor Borman, councillors. My name is Deanna Thompson. I'm an occupational therapist. I moved to Canmore in 1993 for a part-time job at the Canmore Pain Clinic. I now work for myself, and for over 10 years, I've had the privilege, really been blessed, to be introducing many in our community to a mindfulness meditation practice. Some of you may know me from that. I do these programs at the hospital, and they're supported by the Canmore and Area Healthcare Foundation, and they're free. In 2001, I purchased a small, affordable duplex on Lawrence Grassy Ridge. I did my due diligence when purchasing my home. I spoke with those I knew in the planning department, my friend Steve, and I came to understand the time and effort that had been undertaken by the town to establish the 1998 settlement agreement. I learned the Peaks was capped at 404 units and that nothing would be built in the green space across from me. And I received assurances from my builder, who was Bob Kosian. I've learned a few things, though, since that first application that came forth in 2014. I've learned that you're not bound. You're not legally bound by the settlement agreement, and that surprised me. I've learned, too, that the settlement agreement mandated that all remaining undeveloped land in Peaks only be used for affordable housing. I've learned that you, the town, is very interested in increasing the number of affordable units, and I congratulate you on the number of affordable units you have and are bringing forth. It's really made a difference to our town. I've also learned that this process can be a little unkind and not very friendly. And it's been hard for me, I have to tell you that. But today I've chosen to wonder what it would be like to be in your shoes. What would it be like to be a councillor with this application? Well, okay, what would it be like if I was over there? Well, there's 3 parcels, there's 3 sites. The first is on a rock outcrop, and it has 5 large executive homes. The entrances to the homes, if you heard tonight, are on a very steep hill. There's lots of concerns around safety, and there's some blasting that may or may not be required. It doesn't seem like a very good place to build. And then there's Site 2. Site 2 is directly across from me, and it's the most suitable site on which to build. What's going to happen here? 8 3-story, large, although I heard maybe affordable, but I don't know what affordable means. I think they're going to be very expensive units for that site. And the plan, I know, is for both the duplexes and for these executive homes to have basement suites. But I also know, and you know, that while you may mandate that these structures have basement suites, there's no insurance that these suites will be rented by people who live and work in Canmore, or even rented at all. And that neither Site 2 or Site 3 are the units in keeping with the town's affordable housing, right? That interest of yours, none of those are. And none of the units on either of these sites are in keeping with the settlement agreement, where all remaining land in the Peaks only be used for affordable housing. So then we come to Site 1, 7 townhomes, market affordable, I don't know what that means, and 7 perpetually affordable housing units. And that must, for you, right? I go, wow, 7. That's a big number. It's going to add to your pool. But the site is in the flood zone, as we've heard tonight, and there's a high likelihood of water damage. There's a costly berm that must be considered to try to protect the site. And any flood mitigation requires approvals from the province. And I asked myself, I did, and maybe you have too, why the least expensive units were placed in this flood zone. Why they weren't placed directly across from me. where it's safe, and where it's the most suitable land to be built. That, to me, makes sense. It doesn't seem very nice. It doesn't seem like a good idea to put PAW units on Site 1. I know that these 7 PAW units are critical for the positive score on the SSR. And I've also learned that there's a high likelihood that you, the town, will become responsible for this site and responsible for the building on this area. I wonder if any of you would be considering this application without these 7 PAW units. So I went, well, what would I do? And I've come to the conclusion that 7 PAW units is not enough. If I was a councillor, I'd say no. Because the 7 PAW units are in the flood zone, and because you may end up being responsible for building them. The 1998 settlement agreement mandates that all remaining land in peaks only be used for affordable housing. You can do this. You can make only anything built there be affordable housing. I understand you're able to turn down, right, an application at land use bylaw stage. I invite you to honor the spirit of the 1998 settlement agreement and the town of Canmore's affordable housing values and vote against this application. Wait until an application is presented that is only for affordable housing, because that's what our community needs. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Your Worship and members of Town Council, my name is Paul Moynihan. My wife Colleen is here with me this evening. We own a condo on Prospect Heights, and we bought that condo in the year 2000, so we've been here for 18 years. I've also done an extensive amount of volunteer work in this community, and I oppose this development proposal on a number of grounds. The first one is that, there's clearly going to be a negative impact on Quarry Lake, and that is a jewel in our crown here in Canmore. And again, to be able to think about that we're going to be looking at the back end of houses from Quarry Lake when the rest of the world is coming here, I just can't imagine that. The second one is the negative impact on the peaks, and it's been stated over and over and over again on so many fronts, right? It's negative on on wildlife. It will facilitate more human-wildlife interactions. The wildlife corridor will clearly be jeopardized and compromised. The density in the peaks is already at a very high level, and adding another 30 or 40 units to this, I can't imagine that. Parking is we frequently visit that neighborhood, and parking is always on both sides of the road, up and down the entire site. Again, to add another 30 or 40 units, I just can't imagine that. And finally, I really do believe that this is a gross injustice on the residents of Peaks of Grassy. Talking about violating the terms of the deal of the 1998 settlement agreement, and I submit to you that was a deal that council made, an agreement, your word, your bond, with the people who live in that neighborhood, who have purchased property in that neighborhood, but it was also your word and your bond to all the residents of Canmore. So that I would encourage you to think about that. Again, I'm not a lawyer. But I think that you do have it's morally reprehensible to just set that moral agreement aside. That was your deal, that was your bond with the residents of Canmore and of Peaks of Grassy. And to do so in the interests of 7 PAH units, I think honestly, you have a lot of other land that you can build PAH, and do it in size, do it in consequence, not just 7 units. And also it can be incorporated into greenfield projects, be it at Silvertip or Stewart Creek or wherever they may happen in Canmore. But to force this into a brownfield existing development against the wishes of its residents, I just can't imagine the grounds on which you would do that. And finally, the other thing that really bothers me about this is people come to Canmore because they love this place. They recreate, they
relax, they heal here. And all I heard today was from the residents, particularly from the residents, that this is a great source of pain to them. This is not what Canmore is all about. This is not what you guys are all about. You're good people. You're elected to do the right thing. Forcing this project through against the will of the people in the neighborhood and the will of the people in Canmore. There's only been two parties that have talked about it in favor, and they both have a clear vested interest. And honestly, if I were you three gentlemen, I would really think seriously. That would not want to be my legacy.
Excuse me.
So, okay. So if I were the three gentlemen, it would not be the legacy I would like to live with for the rest of my life, that forcing a project against the will of the people and their neighbors and their friends. So in summary, I would like to encourage you, I know you're fine people, do the right thing here and don't let this development proceed. Thank you.
Eileen?
Mayor and Council, my name is Eileen Patterson, a Canmore resident and former Canmore councillor. It's time to put the brakes on development. We're already reaching our carrying capacity. My opposition to this proposal fall in line with those of Peaks of Grassy. I am representing myself and not any particular group or organization. My planning background includes representing council on the Calgary Regional Planning Commission and the Alberta Planning Board. I've attended many planning conferences and been on many boards and committees. The professor in my land use planning studies always emphasized that land use planning equals quality of life. This has been my guiding principle since moving to Canmore in 1975. I drew inspiration for my presentation from ecological historian Robert Sanford, who in 2008 published this book, The Weekender Effect. You might see on the front cover there's development on the side of the mountain. Bob described the effects on Canmore in 2008 by those who would buy us out and take away everything that gave us our sense of place as a mountain community. His premise is, it isn't what we built, but what we saved and protected. Our mountain heritage must supersede wealthy urbanites who build empty houses which do not contribute to our community life. We are mountain people and inseparable from our landscape and nature and our culture. Our natural systems are under great stress and changing rapidly. We are losing our very uniqueness, which newcomers are attracted to. Mountains are special and attractive places for real estate investment and speculation. Unfortunately, what we saved and protected has been our undoing. Wealthy offshore urbanites come escaping from their crowded, dirty places they helped to build. Our predicament compares to indigenous peoples who have inhabited this area and became refugees on their own land. Mr. Sanford suggests that the heartbeat of Canmore is not understood by developers or speculators. This development proposal is nothing more than a real estate investment. Perpetually affordable housing means nothing to those who receive yearly rental increases, putting those on fixed incomes at risk. Poor land use planning has not been balanced with ecological protection. Bob Sanford posed these questions. Will locals be able to afford to live in our community? Where will the dispossessed go? What do you want your community to be like after full build-out? What are we leaving our children and descendants? My proposal is for you to purchase back this land, do what is right, and give the Peaks residents finally some peace. Think about your own legacy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. My name is Carolyn McCartney. I am a resident of the Peaks neighborhood. Thank you for taking the time to hear our concerns. Unfortunately, these days, when residents do not readily agree with proposed development in municipalities, they're often pigeonholed into the NIMBY category. They're not in my backyard. And usually any arguments or point of view or perspective that follow are discounted immediately, even if they are valid. So I'm asking today that we all put aside our bias, and to listen to what is being presented by each side with an open mind. Being able to do something legally doesn't mean that we should necessarily do it morally or ethically. I really struggle with the idea that we can disregard agreements made by previous councils, in this case, the settlement agreement. As I understand it, this council decided to break the settlement agreement and approve the second application due to the fact that it will include some PAH units, not all PAH units, as was the spirit of the settlement agreement. Interestingly enough, is the contract between the developer and CCHS, which gives the developer the option to sell the option lands for $10 for cause of force majeure, and therefore not build the PAH units. This document's definition of force majeure includes inclement weather, strikes, protests, shortage of material or labor, delay in granting the permits, delay in the rezoning approval, and delay caused by litigation, which allows for plenty of opportunities for the developer to walk away from developing Site 1 where the PAH units are proposed. If this happened, the town would not only acquire the flood hazard parcel, it would also have to assume the cost to build the PAH units and the flood mitigation measures. At this point, I ask myself, if it was my family's budget, would I agree to expose us to such liability and risk without any guarantee? I'd have to say no. If this scenario unfolds, we will have approved a rezoning based on the fact that it will secure 7 PAH units, which would not be built, and also allow the developer the opportunity to build the more lucrative properties. It is also important to consider that without the PAH units, the SSR score is negative, which means that the town will realize more negative impacts than benefits. I believe there's an obligation to ensure that the results and the reasons for approving this development come to fruition should this council decides to support it. I also struggle with the fact that as human, we have a really short memory. If the development had been proposed in 2014, in the aftermath of the 2013 flood, everyone would have agreed that approving such a development in a hazard flood zone was a really bad idea. It is not only a bad idea because it costs dearly to any community that are caught in it. The financial costs are just one factor. The emotional costs are immeasurable. At the Steep Creek presentation last week, BGC Engineering informed us that the impact and risks associated with the combined effect of the Stone Canyon Creek, and Zed Creek flooding at the same time haven't been assessed. So if they were to flood at the exact same period, we don't know what the risk level is. I know because my house is in kind of that zone. And then during the presentation, Mr. Andy Asarti, Town of Canmore Manager Engineering Services, also informed us that the cost of building the mitigation measures is borne by the town for existing developments, and that the cost for the flood mitigation work on any new developments are assumed by the developer. Then I'm asking, why is the town proposing to share the cost of mitigation measures with the developer on this project? It's been told that Possibly this project would protect the existing housing, but all the plans that I've seen so far is the berm or the wall, and we're not sure which one because it's confusing. Sometimes it's referred to a wall, sometimes it refers to a berm, would stop at the end of like the property line or the backyard of our property, like the property line at the back of our property, and therefore it would not protect any of us that are already there, right? The BEGC Stone Canyon Creek Diversion Wall design in the draft report indicates in section 1.2 that the town of Canmore has advised that the wall is intended to reduce the impacts of surface water flooding, but it is acceptable for the wall to be overwhelmed, outflanked, or destroyed by the 100 to 300 year return period surface water flow. And in the BGC memorandum on page 3, BGC wrote in conclusion that the option 1, the recommended solution by BGC, can be supported by good engineering practice and will achieve the structure. Can I finish? Am I allowed to finish, sir?
Try to be brief.
I'll try to be. Option 2, proposed by the town, is associated with a high degree of variability in the post-fixity, and our analysis showed that they may not be able to resist the design event pressures. Therefore, it is not considered an engineering solution by GEA. This doesn't seem to be an acceptable or adequate solution, so why would council or town of Canmore support a design that is not considered an engineering solution? I had other point, I will submit my letter. Thank you very much for hearing my concerns, and I'm just asking to please vote against this application for rezoning until a better proposal that supports the development of PAH units that are not exclusively in a flood zone, but on the entire parcel be brought forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Borman and councillors. My name is Renee Boone. I've lived in Lawrence Grassy Ridge since 2006. I'm a directly affected neighbor adjacent to Site 3, and I oppose this bylaw. I appreciate the opportunity I've had to speak to most of you recently about my concerns with this bylaw proposal. I'll be discussing issues specific to Site 3 that need to be addressed at land use, the unsuitability of Site 1 for any development, and the applicant's SSR score. Site 3 is presented as being consistent with the adjacent properties. However, the back property lines actually extend 5 meters beyond the existing lots. With the proposed setbacks, the building envelopes then also extend 5 meters beyond the existing houses. In the previous Peaks Landing application, or round 2, I attempted to raise this issue during subdivision stage, only to realize that setbacks are dealt with by council at land use. As a result, I'm appealing to you at this stage to either bring the proposed Site 3 back property lines up 5 meters to align with the adjacent lots, or to increase the backyard setback by 5 meters so that the actual houses are all aligned. I'm also concerned about the 7.5 meter drainage right-of-way in the existing lots setbacks that would be disrupted by adjacent buildings on Site 3 as currently proposed. The side setbacks for Site 3 also need to be addressed now. Currently, development on Site 3 can be constructed as close as 1.5 meters from the western edge with no buffer from our house, where the elevation difference between houses will be considerable because of the steep slopes and bedrock outcrop. A buffer is being proposed by the applicants for the east edge of the site as a 4-meter strip of land to be zoned R1B. That strip of land is intended to be consolidated with the parcel immediately to the east upon subdivision. It's reasonable that a similar consideration be given to the west edge of Site 3, with a 4-meter strip of land that could be zoned to MR to provide a buffer for the affected neighbor, us, and community access to the proposed MR land behind the site. The potential impact of blasting of the rock outcrop on Site 3 is a serious concern to us as to our neighbors. Although it's stated in the application that there'll be no blasting, we need assurance that the commitment for no blasting is observed during any possible future development. This should be codified in the bylaw or established as a restrictive covenant during subdivision. Another major concern I have with any development on Site 3 is its location on a blind hill and curve. Until a car passes over the crest of Lawrence Grassy Bridge, as we've seen, everything on the downhill side is not visible. Our house is about 60 meters down the hill from the crest. At 50 kilometers an hour, a car would reach our driveway in 4.3 seconds, just doing the math. At 30 kilometers an hour, it would arrive in 7.2 seconds. It takes me about 4 or 5 seconds to back out of my driveway into the far right uphill driving lane. To date, I've fortunately never experienced a near collision. However, the proposed 5 driveways along Site 3 will obviously be closer to this crest. A driveway at say 30 meters from the crest, or halfway up the hill from my house, would be reached in 2.2 seconds at 50 kilometers an hour, or 3.6 seconds at 30 kilometers an hour. Although I haven't taken into account reaction times or stopping distances, if it takes a typical driver like me 4 or 5 seconds to back out and clear the downhill driving lane, I see the high potential for collisions. The safest option is not to have any houses or driveways on Site 3. I also share my fellow presenters tonight the concerns regarding Site 1 after reading the BGC 2016 report on the diversion wall design. Does it make sense to knowingly put affordable housing where the proposed mitigation berm is expected to be breached by the 100 to 300-year storms? I was told on more than one occasion in my recent discussions with you that provincial funds could be available to help clean up damages caused by catastrophic flooding, such as what was experienced at Cougar Creek in 2013. Why should provincial funds be expected when a town knowingly allows development in a flood risk zone, albeit a low risk, but a risk nonetheless? Finally, I noted that the applicant's SSR has a net score of 64 as presented by administration, and we've discussed that. The 7 units of PAH proposed on Site 1 contribute 72 points to that score. Without the PAH on Site 1, there's a net -8 score for Sites 2 and 3. This means that there's a net negative impact on the community for the development proposed on these sites. For the sake of 7 PAH, are the negative impacts on the community to be ignored? As our council, you have a big decision ahead of you regarding rezoning the urban reserve lands in Peaks of Grassy. I urge you to please consider everything presented tonight and reject this bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Tricia Botch. I live in Canmore. I do not live in the Peaks of Grassy. I am not directly affected by this development. But I do think I have something significant to add in terms of the decision-making process. Peaks Landing is an application for which there is no supporting incentivization policy in the land use bylaw to promote affordable housing through its proposed method. At present, the only incentivization policy within the land use bylaw for affordable housing is density bonus. For the sake of certainty and fairness for all landowners in Canmore, it is imperative that Council Motion 199-2015 be finalized first through the development of clear policy. At present, only part of the Council's Motion 199-2015 has been achieved through changes to the MDP, although never fully explained, for the purpose of eliminating the sustainable screening process. Incentivization policies for affordable housing should not be driven by developer applications, but rather development applications should be submitted in response to clear land use policy for promoting affordable housing through the land use bylaw. At the request of BODA, Council passed a motion on July 7th as follows, moved by Mayor Boroman, that Council direct administration to implement option 3 as presented in the staff report, to develop policies within the municipal development plan and the land use bylaw that could replace the sustainable screening process policy. In part, option 3 includes eliminating the sustainable screening process once application concepts have been integrated into regulation, and that would involve at the planning level no matrix, but applicants would be required to address sustainable issues related to the application. At the development application level, no matrix, amend the NDP and the LUB to incorporate sustainable measures in policy and regulation, as well as subdivision standards, engineering, design, and construction guidelines. For sustainable measures that cannot be regulated, make provisions in the land use bylaw to incentivize development that address key issues. BODA did not support the other options, but they supported option 3, and admin agreed, and council agreed. At present, the town does not have the legal right to mandate the provision of affordable housing within private developments, and Motion 199-215 has not been completed 3.5 years later. Presently, 94% of the affordable housing has been built through the contribution of public lands. Voluntary options for the inclusion of affordable housing through the private sector are regulated within Section 13 of Canmore's land use bylaw, density bonusing. Incentivization options for developers include 3 additional fair market units for every PAH built on site, 2 additional fair market units for every PAH built off-site. Further, developers are provided with building variances of up to 30% for projects that include PAH. As well, developers are reimbursed $275 a square foot for each PAH they build. Although density bonusing regulations have existed in Canmore's land use bylaw for a number of years to help incentivize affordable housing, very little, if any, has been constructed through the private sector within new areas of town. While Council adopted the sustainable screening process in 2007 as a means of encouraging higher standards of development that could not be regulated, including affordable housing, in 2010 the provincial government amended the MGA to restrict the town of Canmore's ability to enforce the sustainable screening process in response to BOTA's appeal to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. As documented in the May 21st, 2013 Council Agenda Package, it was BOTA's position that the subjective nature of the SSP took away from a developer's right to certainty, and that the lack of appeals process took away from the legal landowner's rights. In my opinion, recent changes to our municipal development plan for the purpose of eliminating the SSP now create uncertainty for landowners within existing neighborhoods which do not have overriding ASPs or ARPs, such as statutory planning documents, including the settlement agreement. Policies for incentivizing affordable housing should be adopted by the land use bylaw before an application for affordable housing is proposed to council which does not conform to the land use bylaw, especially given that the town cannot mandate its inclusion within the private sector. It is simply not in the best interest of the community to be put in a situation where affordable housing can be used to leverage development within existing communities because of loopholes in planning regulation, given no clear policy or legislation exists. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other people that'd like to speak at this time? In any way?
Hi, my name's William Koenig, and I'm a resident of the Peaks, Lawrence Grassy. I'm one of the original residents still residing there. I'm not an expert on environmental issues. I'm not an expert on flood mitigation. I'm a financial analyst. I read reports every day for a living. I'm an expert on reports. And actually, I'm an expert on reports and business models. And I've heard a lot of reports. There's 2 types of reports. There's the ones that come to you written, and there's the ones that come to you verbally. And as an analyst, we get a lot of reports. We get a lot of third-party opinions. And whenever we have doubt, we try and call somebody to see what they really think, somebody that's close to the action, because those reports have the most validity. And so you've gotten a lot of reports here, and some of them are very valid, and some of them date back to 1996. Can you imagine a financial analyst making recommendations to you based on a report in 1996? You should really listen to the people that are giving you current reports on such things like what the animal counts are, where those animals are, because they're on the ground. They're not jettisoned in by some outside group to do a short-term study and say, this is the assessment. These people here all through this neighborhood are out there every single day, walking, talking, seeing, and sharing information. You just have to know how quickly, when there's a bear sighting, to know how quick that information is. Traffic. You can rely on the 1996 report. Certainly that's what the town website is endorsing. Or you can listen to all the people in this community who one after another says, don't put another car in that community. It's dangerous. You're going to probably kill some kid if you keep this up. And then it leads me now to the business models. I'm a capitalist. I like when people make money. I like when people make obscene amounts of money. Usually that's in companies. That's my job. We get to affordable housing, and that's like feeding the bears. Because the people that you're putting into that affordable housing are usually people that are making minimum wage. And it's the companies that are running those people at minimum wage that are making all the money. So the more affordable housing you put in, the more you're encouraging people to do minimum wage. And I'll give you an example. It's a company called Walmart. They are the largest employer in America. They employ over 1 million employees, and their whole model is based on minimum wage. So you really need to assess this affordable housing model because it'll never end. You'll just keep bringing in companies that'll say, look, the town's going to subsidize everything. And that's not the best model for people. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak at this time? I'll ask again, is there anybody else that would like to speak to the application?
Town Council, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Kathy Rutherford, and I have lived in Canmore for over 20 years. I started my journey at Restwell Trailer Park, which was truly an affordable community. I bought a trailer for $16,000 and was one of the many happy residents that lived there until we found out that Frank Kernick was going to develop the area. It's now Spring Creek, and it's mainly high-end accommodation, as you know. And the few remaining residents in affordable accommodation will soon be losing their homes. Many of the friends... Oh, thanks. Many of the friends I made there still need affordable accommodation, but none of them will be able to afford to buy one of the affordable units proposed in this development. They are financially out of reach. So they will rent in town until something more affordable becomes available. The 7 or 8 affordable units aren't that affordable for a lot of Canmore residents. We were lucky when we left Restwell because we had family members willing to help us build a house at a time when buying a lot was still a possibility for us. So my husband and I, along with my son, moved up to Peaks of Grassy, and we have been here for a number of years. We share this neighborhood with wonderful people from all walks of life. We all deal with the parking issues and the narrow streets because we love living up there. We also all share this neighborhood with wildlife. We have pictures of bears going up and down our stairs, and there are no berries on our property. So we have bear spray at my back door, and when I head to go catch the bus, it's on me. When I go for a walk on my street, it's on me. And when I head to Quarry Lake, taking the route under the power lines, it is on me. Unfortunately, one thing I've noticed when I head to Quarry Lake is that there are a lot of people there that really have no clue they are in bear country. Even if they have heard about bears and elk, the potential danger is just not registering for some reason. Even with my famous signs that I put up every summer, they are woefully unprepared for a wildlife encounter. We can't afford to push more wildlife in that direction. If you allow more development to happen, there will eventually be an encounter, and it might be a death. Or the other option might be our beautiful lake will be closed most of the summer. Thank you for allowing me to share my views.
Thank you.
Kathy Rutherford.
Is there anybody else here that would like to speak at this time? I'll ask again if there's anybody that'd like to take the mic and speak to the application. And well, last time, anybody wants to speak? Okay, we're done with that part of the meeting then. So as I noted earlier, after this meeting adjourns, the municipal clerk will publish a record of public submissions that includes all written submissions received regarding this matter, regardless of whether or not the writer was here and spoke or not. I don't know if the administration has any final closing comments. See none, I'll then move the public hearing be adjourned. Thanks for coming.